Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. Nice to have an audience again. Today is Tuesday, September 20th. This is a meeting of the Carrboro Town Council, and we will have both a regular business meeting on our agenda as well as at the end of the agenda, a work session of the council. And we will start as usual. I think Fred Joyner, our poet laureate, is running a little bit late. So I think that means it's a good opportunity for me to read a couple of proclamations and give Fred some time to come read us a poem. So I'll do that now, and I'm going to start with fire department. I see our interim fire chief in the audience. If you wouldn't mind, Chief, coming on up.
Hi.
I think everyone on the council knows our interim chief. For those of you who are in the audience who don't, I introduce to you our interim fire chief, Will Potter, who has been with the department for several years now and actually grew up here in Carrboro too, which is an interesting phenomenon for us here in the town. So welcome. Thanks for being here tonight. This is a proclamation for Fire Prevention Week, and I like to use these opportunities to just issue proclamations to appreciate our staff, and Fire Prevention Week presents a good opportunity to do that for our fire rescue department. So I'll read the proclamation and share that with Chief Potter. Whereas the Carrboro Fire Rescue Department's core mission includes protecting lives, property, and the community from the destructive effects of all hazards, and whereas Carrboro Fire Rescue uses a multifaceted community risk reduction model to achieve this mission, which includes education, engineering, fire code enforcement, economic incentives, and emergency response. And whereas Carrboro Fire Rescue's 37 first responders responded to 1,761 calls for service in fiscal year 2022. And whereas Carrboro Fire Rescue has had 2 promotions to the rank of captain, 1 promotion to the rank of lieutenant, and 2 promotions to the rank of driver operator in the past year, and 2 employees have completed their fire officer certification, and 1 has completed the fire inspector certification process. And whereas also in fiscal year 2022, fun fact, Carrboro Fire Rescue added a water tanker to the fleet to assist with response in areas that don't have access to fire hydrants. And whereas fire is a serious public safety concern, and homes are the locations where people are at greatest risk from fire. And whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in home fires in half, and people who have planned and practiced a home fire escape plan are more prepared and more likely to survive a fire. And whereas the National Fire Prevention Association has designated October 9th to 15th of 2022 as Fire Prevention Week, an annual observance now in its 100th year that will kick off with National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Weekend on October 8th and 9th, a tribute to all firefighters who have died in the line of duty. And whereas Carrboro Fire Rescue's first responders are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and protection education. Now, therefore, I, Damon Siles, Mayor of the town of Carrboro, North Carolina, do hereby proclaim October 9th to 15th, 2022 to be Fire Prevention Week in Carrboro. I encourage all residents to ensure everyone in their home understands the sounds of the smoke alarms, knows how to respond, to make a home fire escape plan, and to ensure their smoke alarms are working and meet the needs of all family members, including those with sensory or physical disabilities. I also encourage residents to share their appreciation for Carrboro Fire Rescue's dedicated first responders and to learn more about the community risk reduction services the department provides. This is the 20th day of September, 2022. Thanks for being here, Chief.
Thank you, sir.
You can applaud, too. I'm going to. You want to say any words, or you just want to
Excellent. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. The only thing that I'll add to those residents in the area and to the council is that for all of the things that we discussed here with smoke alarms, escape plans, the fire rescue department has the ability to help residents with that. So if there are residents that you know of that need these services, that would like these services, please send them our way. We also have a number of public education programs that we can offer. We do fire extinguisher training. We really have quite a few. I'd say our website is probably the best place to go look and see what services are available. So please look at that. And if there's somebody that you know that needs those services, please point them our direction. Thank you very much for your time. Yes, ma'am.
Is the fire department still doing the blue home address IDs
Yes, ma'am. We still make those signs, and there is an order form. There's an online order form, so people order them there, and then they come in to pick them up.
And maybe you could just tell the public why they're important and worth, securing for your home.
Absolutely. So the department creates these signs. They are probably, I would say, about 2 feet long and about 6 inches wide with address numbers. And that way, kind of our saying is, if we can't find you, we can't help you. And so especially at night, residents often have numbers on their houses, but they are not always well lit. Especially at night, if you turn your lights off, it can be a challenge for us to find your address and locate your property. So both for us and for our law enforcement brothers and sisters, having that address clearly marked with a reflective sign is a significant benefit to our organizations. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor. Good to see you.
All right. And Fred, we started just a little bit without you. You gave me some opportunity to read some things out, so we will come to you next. I want to share a couple of things. One thing before the proclamation for Community Planning Month, and that is an award that the town has received that I want to highlight for everyone. This is the 2022 Marvin Collins Outstanding Planning Award for our comprehensive plan, which was presented to the town last week in Winston-Salem, specifically to our planning administrator, Tina Moon, and our associate planner, Ben Berlsheimer, who attended the American Planning Association's North Carolina Chapter Annual Conference in Winston-Salem last week, and I was privileged to be able to join them and accept this award on behalf of the town. This is in the award category for comprehensive plans for small communities, which is communities that are 25,000 population or less. So I wanted to acknowledge our planning staff for this great achievement, and also the task force that we appointed as volunteers to lead that process, and the consultants at TESCA who helped us get through it all over those 2 years of hard work and community engagement. So I want to first applaud Trish and her staff and all of those people for their accomplishment. And coincidentally, coming up is Community Planning Month, and I'm going to read that proclamation now. Whereas change is constant and affects all places, and community planning and plans can help communities manage change in a way that provides more and better options for how people live, work, and get around. And whereas in 2022, the town of Carrboro completed its first comprehensive plan, Carrboro Connects, a 20-year plan built on the twin foundations of racial equity and climate action, that for the first time brings the goals of the town as a whole into a single document, from expanding housing and transportation options to supporting local businesses to providing access to open space. And whereas on September 14th, 2022, the American Planning Association North Carolina chapter presented to the town of Carrboro the 2022 Marvin Collins Outstanding Planning Award, which you've all just seen, at the group's annual meeting in Winston-Salem. And whereas in the past year, the town's planning staff have worked with NCDOT on a new cross-section design for East Main Street to add bicycle facilities, supported an Eagle Scout tree and milkweed planting project at Anderson Park as part of the town's Monarch Pledge, hosted a movie screening and farmers market activity for the town's Bee City USA designation, participated in the Solarize the Triangle program led by TJ Cog, submitted an application to the Orange County Community Climate Action Grant Program for a solar array on the roof of the 203 project, and hosted a volunteer invasive species removal event at Wilson Park, among many, many other projects and events. And whereas the town's planning staff also finalized an electric vehicle location suitability analysis with the towns of Chapel Hill and Hillsborough, Orange County, and UNC Chapel Hill, finalized a request for proposals for a fleet alternative fuel study, and finalized a grant proposal for an electric vehicle charging station at Willow Creek Shopping Center, again, among many other things I know the planning staff have been working on this past year. This is all in addition, by the way, to completing a comprehensive plan. And whereas the full benefit of planning requires public officials and community members who understand, support, and demand excellence in planning and plan implementation. And whereas the American Planning Association has designated the month of October 2022 as National Community Planning Month, now therefore I, Damon Siles, Mayor of the town of Carrboro, North Carolina, do hereby proclaim October 2022 to be Community Planning Month in Carrboro. I encourage all residents to celebrate the contributions made by the professional planners of Carrboro and our neighboring communities, and to recognize the dedication of the members of our numerous advisory boards and commissions and other community members who regularly contribute their time and talents to the improvement of Carrboro. Furthermore, I encourage residents to become advocates for and participants in the implementation of our award-winning Carrboro Connects comprehensive plan. Thank you, Trish. Do you want to say some things? At the very least, you have to take these from me. I can hold on to it.
Sure. Well, to mostly thank you, and I would just echo the comments about participation in the process, and our comprehensive plan really reflects the level of participation we had. I mean, for a community our size, we engaged with over 4,000 residents, and so that's a pretty remarkable statistic for a comprehensive planning process. So, I mean, I really applaud you guys because I know you all had a lot to do with that, encouraging members of our community to feel like they could be involved. So I look forward to the next steps in this process with all of you and with everybody who we work with. So
Thank you, Trish.
you bet. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Made it,
You're
Trish.
welcome.
Right, thanks again, everyone. Thankfully, Fred Joyner, a poet laureate, has arrived, and we're very happy to see you again, Fred, as usual. Please take the podium.
Sorry to be late. I'm a working dad. So things sometimes. I'm always thankful to be here. Thank you so much for having me here. I was torn between what I would read. I read to you from Henry Dumas last week, and I bought this other book, The Illuminated Space, which I've read from before. And I've decided what I'm going to read, and I decided because I've been feeling a bit of grief lately. You know, I know that a lot of us we're fortunate to be sitting here, and you know, for most of us, the pandemic is over. For some of us, we feel that the pandemic is over, but I just had a good friend die the other day. I don't know that it was COVID, but it's amplified by this time. And so this poem, this is a bit of prose by this great filmmaker and media artist named Marilyn Freeman. If you can find this book, just go out and get it. It's a really good piece to meditate on. And this one is about grief. And so I'm going to dedicate this reading here to Dr. Brian Horton. He was director of the Jazz Studies program at North Carolina Central University. He died on the 14th. The body knows. I sat on my therapist's couch with my eyes closed as she guided me through a somatic practice, a process of discerning where in my body I physically experience an emotion in order to gain a deeper insight about it. I sat silently for a long time, trying to identify what is happening in my body, where I felt the grief, and what exactly it felt like. The physically engaged psychotherapy is akin to doing, and my Latin is bad, so pardon me, doing lectio divina with my body. Read, reflect, respond, rest. I sat with the grief, pondering the size and shape of it inside of me. It felt like a heavy, dead weight in my chest and gut. But the longer I sat with the heaviness, the less sorrow I felt. My grief slowly morphed into rage, hot rage. This was no dead weight. This felt wild and furious. The feeling intensified until it was vibrating throughout my solar plexus, powerful and enlivening. Bringing my awareness to my physical experience alchemized the grief into rage, and then the rage into something beyond trauma. It all happened in a matter of a few focused minutes, my grief now feeling like pure energy. As I sat silently with that energized vibration, I began to hear a sound within me, a very intense hum, a nerve-wracking drone, not too low, not too high, with little if any change in pitch. The sound resonated deeply inside my chest. I felt empowered by it. I felt myself responding to it, as in Oratio in Lectio Divina. What is this invitation? My response was instant. Make art with this sound. that paralyzing grief was gone. The rage was gone. I felt awake. And then, while feeling that humming vibration and sitting with my response, make art with this sound. That dizzying first morning light footage appeared in my mind's eye. Thank you.
Fred. Thanks for making time with us, as always. All right. Fred, I appreciate you. Let's move on to our announcement of upcoming meetings. Mary?
On September 21st at 7 o'clock here at the Town Hall, there's an Affordable Housing Advisory Commission meeting. Also on September 21st, that's tomorrow, right? At 7 o'clock here in the council room, there's a Board of Adjustment meeting. And then the following week on September 28th at 6 p.m. at the Carrboro Century Center, there's an Arts Committee meeting. And then also on September 28th at 6 p.m., there's a Racial Equity Commission meeting, and that is at the Bim Street facility at 108 Bim Street. And then our next council meeting will be October 11th at 7 p.m.
Thanks so much, Mary. I think, yeah, as Barbara noted, and Mary, thank you for reminding us that our next regular council meeting will be October 11th. We have a couple of weeks where we won't be having regular council meetings. I just wanted to note, and I'll call on some others real quick, that tomorrow morning is also a meeting of the Chapel Hill Orange County Visitors Bureau Advisory Board. Randy, and then
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that next week, September 27th and October 4th are Jewish holidays. Next week is Rosh Hashanah, and the following week is Yom Kippur, and that's why we are meeting next again on the 11th. Is that right?
the 11th. Thanks, Randy. Any others? Yes, Susan?
I just was going to mention, since we won't see each other until October 11th, that the Carrboro Music Festival is happening on October 2nd. I think it's our 24th. This is our 25th. And it is a all-day free event, sort of showcasing all of the really great musical talent in the whole triangle. And this will be the first music festival where we actually have an honorarium for our musicians, $250 honorarium, and special thanks to Jackie Helvey for being such a strong advocate for that and making it happen. Looking forward to that.
Okay. Yes, Eleazar.
Thank you. The one thing I wanted to mention is, and also thank you, Mayor, for the proclamation around Hispanic Heritage Month, Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month. It is ongoing. It started on the 15th, and it goes through October 15th. And there's several events that'll be happening around Carrboro and the Triangle in honor of Latinx and Hispanic heritage. And there's a couple of Afro-Latinx events going on, so I invite members of the community to take part in that.
Thanks, Eleazar, and thank you for talking with me about that, about Hispanic Heritage Month. I think the one that's most local for us coming up will be, I think, October 14th. The school district is going to be hosting an event here on our town commons, which should be a lot of fun, so look out for that. And this Saturday is Durham Pride, by the way. I know at least a few of us up here will be marching for the town and hope others can be there to join us. All right, we'll move on to public comment now. We have a few folks signed up to speak. And I will mention, I spoke with Mr. Sargent earlier about the work session we have this evening, where we don't typically accept public comment, but I know that he, Dan Sargent from Rebuilding Together the Triangle, as well as Alice Jacoby from Habitat for Humanity, are here to listen to our conversation and hear what we have to say about the ARPA item work session that we'll be talking about a little later tonight. And then that will be coming back to us on October 11th for a more formal consideration. In terms of general public comment, I have signed up. We'll start with Kevin Pombuff. Welcome, Kevin. And if you'll make sure that the clerk receives copies as well. Thank you. As usual, Kevin, you know about the 3 minutes and all.
My name is Kevin Poinbuff, and I'm here to continue to address a little-known but well-established North Carolina law and corresponding TOC ordinance, non-conforming use. On these slides here, you'll see Google Starlight photos of the Merritt Gravel Pit, which is outlined in red, which has been in operation since the 1960s. Merritt Gravel Pit is a sand and gravel surface pit and non-conforming use operating in the town of Carrboro jurisdiction. In 1971, the Mining Act was passed, and it requires that all operators clearly define a revegetation plan as part of its permitting process. And that means excavate, revegetate, and release. And logically, digging up the land and the dirt and selling it means that there's limited lifespan. And in the 80s, on this first slide, you'll see that they had excavated, they have revegetated and moved operations north from 3100 on blue, shown in that first slide, up to 3200, which is where they currently operate. On slide 2, 1998, the Merritt Gravel Pit excavated, revegetated, and released the western portion of 3200, and that was released back to the town of Carrboro jurisdiction. 4 years later, the release by DEQ, Merritt Gravel Pit continued excavating to the east and conducting a new beneficial fill operation. And that was in the revegetated and released area. And if we move on to slide 3, you'll see that 12 years later, MGP continues excavating and conducting beneficial fill operations in the released area to the west. We move on to slide 4, 2018. By then, most all the excavation continues to be to the west. Finally, in slide 5. Finally, Merritt Gravel Pit is excavating to the east in the last remaining portion of its property. But what do these images show us? Well, for over 30 years, the Merritt Gravel Pit has done exactly what they want to do. Yeah, they've operated well beyond the legal limits. They've been operating since the 60s without any interruption, without anyone stopping their business. No one's interfered with the rights of Merritt Gravel Pit to legally operate a non-conforming business. But in closing, I'd like to point out the obvious. If Merritt Gravel Pit had complied within its mining permit and the town of Carrboro ordinances from the beginning, they would have fully excavated the land, revegetated as required by the law and the permit, and wound down their business or converted their business to a conforming use.
Kevin, and you shared a copy with the clerk, is that right? Thank you. Mr. Manager, you've received, there we go. Make sure the manager has a copy as well. All right, thank you, Kevin. Next on the list is Shelley Welch. Welcome, Shelley. Shelley, I'll just ask the same if you'll share a copy with the clerk when you can.
I already
please.
did.
Thank you.
My name is Shelley Welch. I'm owner of the Wildflower School in Chapel Hill under the jurisdiction of Carrboro. And we're really wanting to teach the town council about your own LUO, which is an unfortunate situation. You all have within your LUO sections on non-conforming uses. And a non-conforming use comes into being in one of two ways. You annex a part of a town or county, or you change zoning. These are really important policies to be able to implement in order for a town to progress. You annexed where my school is now and where Merritt Gravel Pit is now. And when you annexed Merritt Gravel Pit's property to use it as your watershed, that meant that the Merritt's gravel pit eventually would have to come to a close or move itself into a conforming use. Ever since the day I began looking at this property, I have been accused of trying to put the Merritt gravel pit out of business. And it wasn't until about 2 months ago that I realized you, by annexing the Merritt gravel pit property, determined that they were limited in their time within your jurisdiction. That was you. And now you come back and say, oh, people are trying to put the Merritt's gravel pit out of business. No, you did that when you annexed them and decided it was non-conforming. So I want that to be really clear. I have included in here, I'm not going to read all of this. I have included in here definition of non-conforming use and the town's LUO sections. It's not all of them, but it's what's important. What I really want to explain is that there is a balance of interest when you are looking at non-conforming situations. And that balance has to be between 3 entities. The first is the business, Merritt's Gravel Pit, who through no fault of their own got annexed by you guys, and their whole business began to change. Nevertheless, it is a fact. The second one are the neighbors. I'm one of them. And the third interest is the community. You have a responsibility to thoughtfully balance those 3 interests, and you have failed. You have balanced one interest. You have been hightailing it with fear and saying, no, no, we're not trying to put you out of business, and not enforcing your LUO. Consistently, we have an acre of ponding on the property of my school because you did not enforce your ordinance. That's just one of the issues. I have included in here case law, much of it argued by your own town council, Nick Herman. I have given you directions in here for how you can find all of the cases that Nick Herman has argued representing towns and cities that they have a right, you have a right to have this policy. It is a lawful policy. It has been decided on again and again by the state. He's argued for non-conforming restrictions. And now you want to tell me, oh, it's us trying to get rid of the Merritt gravel pit. No, we're trying to make you enforce your own laws.
Thank you, Shelley. Mr. Manager, would you be sure to share these materials with the attorney as well so that you can be understanding what arguments being made here? I'd appreciate that. Sammy.
Nick, you weren't here at the last meeting, and I'd requested that clarity on this question of type of use be given from the attorney's perspective. Just want to make sure that you received that message.
Brady did. One thing I do want to caution the board about is there was an administrative determination made by the zoning administrator with regard to a complaint dealt with a non-conforming use issue. And that may end up in front of the Board of Adjustment. So I'd be hesitant for legal counsel to weigh in on that.
Okay.
You understand, only because the issue may arise in front of the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I'll just, sorry to interrupt you, but I'll just say thanks to Sammy for the question, and maybe make more sense to follow up by email with the council if you find that there's something that's appropriate for legal counsel to weigh in on right now, but it sounds like there's a case coming before the
I might
board.
want to wait, that's okay. Yeah, you know what I mean, until there's no appeal to the Board of Adjustment.
I mean, I don't know if it's okay unless there was something active. I mean, is it something that we are required, or is this just prudent? I mean, my interest is in being as transparent as possible, and my question is, there's nothing active in terms of a legal proceeding. Is there any reason?
Yeah, here's what I'm saying. I don't think that the time for appealing that administrative determination has expired.
Okay.
So there could be an appeal. But I don't have the dates in front of me, but that's my...
Okay. So in essence, anytime there's a possibility of an appeal to anything, we don't respond in a public manner for...
Case specific, Sammy.
Case specific. Okay. Thank you for that clarity.
Thank you, Nick. Meanwhile, Nick, if you will just take a look at the materials that they
Yeah,
provided.
and I've
and-
seen the prior material.
Thank you very much. Right, next on the list is Brian Crawford. Welcome, Brian. And as I think you probably know, Brian, we ask speakers to limit themselves to about 3 minutes. So I'm going to set a timer and see what happens. It'll make noise at me at some point, so don't be alarmed.
That was the noise we heard.
Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Brian Crawford, and I've been a resident of Carrboro for about 5 years. My wife, Kelly, has lived here for more than 10 years. We currently live on Wyndham Drive in Carrboro in the newly constructed Kentfield neighborhood. Wyndham Drive is a unique road in Carrboro, unique because you cannot drive the full length of it freely. The road is blocked between the Kentfield and Wexford neighborhoods. This arbitrary and permanent blockage is a result of the town council's decision on September 17th, 2019 to install ballers between the two neighborhoods. I am asking you today to unblock Wyndham Drive. I have outlined 4 main points on why Wyndham Drive should be unblocked. First, this roadblock goes against the Carrboro Connector Roads policy, which has been a policy since 1986. This decision was made against all of the advisory board's recommendations, including the Environmental Advisory Board, the Planning Board, and the Transportation Advisory Board. Secondly, this road blockage is a form of modern-day segregation and discrimination. The Kentfield neighborhood is a small community of 20 homes and is not yet complete. However, for the currently occupied homes, the proportion of white residents is 45%, and the remaining majority, 55% of residents, are non-white, and all of different national origin, which is a protected class. I do not have reliable statistics on the Wexford neighborhood, but I would expect that it more closely aligns with the overall demographics of Carrboro, meaning that the majority, or 69% of those residents, are white, while the remaining minority, 31%, would be non-white. The Kentfield neighborhood also has 5, or 25% of our homes designated as affordable housing, while the Wexford neighborhood has, to my knowledge, 0. The current policy of blocking Wyndham Drive is discriminatory, and it is contributing to segregation within Carrboro. The residents who live in Kentfield do not have equal access to the economic center of Carrboro. The town council, in making its decision to block Wyndham Drive, limited the privileges, services, and access to the job center of Carrboro by limiting the linkages for Kentfield residents. Third, the roadblock has created a less safe road. It's now a T-junction, a dead end. In order to cross this roadblock on foot or bicycle, there's no sidewalk. You have to go through an active roadway. Emergency vehicles going around this roadblock take longer to reach emergencies. Alternative routes to the economic center of Carrboro require going through 3 different school zones and also take you on roads with no dedicated bike lanes. Finally, this roadblock goes against the town's climate action goals. Alternative routes increase travel times, increasing CO2 emissions, increasing the consumption of raw materials and cost of road maintenance for the town, and also decreasing Kentfield's white space and increasing our water runoff. To overcome these challenges and overcome these discriminatory and segregation practices, I propose the following. Unblock Wyndham Drive. The town council should not make decisions that go against the connector road policies until a defined percentage of the new residents that would also be impacted by this change move in and be allowed a chance to have a voice. This would also enable a proper traffic assessment to be done with unblocked roads instead of making assumptions on future traffic levels. The town of Carrboro should codify anti-segregation policies into their existing land use and other zoning policies with an emphasis on preventing disparate impacts. The world is already divided enough.
Brian, you're just over your 3 minutes, so.
I have 1 more minute. We don't need increased division in Carrboro, and alternatives exist that do not infringe on the freedoms of Kentfield residents, and I'm confident that we can all come together to find a solution that is safe, fair, and equitable for all residents. I bet you all to come down and see this area.
Thank you, Brian, very much. I think most of us probably remember kind of the discussion that went into that decision. I appreciate your comments on it. I think you find actually a lot of sympathy on the board about that, and I know you're having conversations with some of us outside. I also know you're having some correspondence with the manager about this, about procedure and that kind of thing. So
And I
looks-
appreciate everyone and their responses, and it's been great, especially you.
We definitely have more to talk about, but appreciate you bringing this up. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Mary. All right, we're going to move on, y'all, to the consent agenda. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. The first item on the consent agenda is a resolution scheduling an October 18th, 2022 Town Council meeting and canceling the October 25th, 2022 Town Council meeting. The next item is a request to set a public hearing on a land use amendment relating to certain limitations on the use of criminal penalties. The purpose of this item is for the Town Council to consider setting a public hearing on a text amendment to the land use ordinance to conform to state legislation relating to the use of criminal penalties for violations of development regulations. The next item is a grant project ordinance for FY 21-22 Orange County Community Climate Action Grant Funding. The purpose of this item is for the Town Council to adopt the project ordinance authorizing the Town Manager to accept 2 grants from the FY 21-22 Orange County Community Climate Action Grant Fund and to enter into agreements with Orange County for grant administration. The next item is appointment of Affordable Housing Advisory Commission member to second term. The purpose of this item is to consider the reappointment of Affordable Housing Advisory Commission member Betty Curry to a second 3-year term. The next item is an update on Starlight Drive traffic calming and approval of town code amendments relating to the parking and traffic control signage. The purpose of the item is to provide the Town Council with an update on the installation of traffic calming and other safety measures for Starlight Drive, and to request adoption of the recommended amendments to the town code related to signage for on-street parking and traffic control devices.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there a motion?
Oh, so move it, all 5.
And moved by Randy and seconded by Susan that we approve the consent agenda. Are there any comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Say no. Matter passes unanimously. Thanks all. Happy to see those items moving forward, Mr. Manager. Thank you. We'll move on to other matters.
One comment, real quick.
Sure.
I want to thank all the transportation planner, and I don't think I've met him yet. And I want to thank Danny for his boots on the ground. I heard from Ellen Perry, and she is delighted with the decision for Starlight. So kudos to you all.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate all the community members who came and held our feet to the fire on some of those issues. Some of whom were able to come here today, in previous meetings. And okay, Mr. Manager, back to you.
Okay, the first item of the other matters is the acceptance of and authorization to implement the classification and compensation study. The purpose of the agenda item is to request that the Town Council accept the classification and compensation study report and approve the implementation plan.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there a staff presentation or
We don't have a
information to
presentation
share?
plan for tonight.
You sent a follow-up memo to the council answering some questions from the past meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Council members, is there a motion or any questions or comments that we need to make? Barbara.
Yeah, so I would like to go ahead and move this item.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. It's been moved and seconded that I'm going to say approve the resolution in attachment A, which is to authorize implementation of the study. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Matter passes unanimously. Thank you for all the work that went into that study, Mr. Manager, and for your responsiveness to everyone's questions. I think it was good to have that all down in writing so we can get our concerns addressed.
You're very welcome. If I may say on behalf of all town employees, we really do appreciate the Town Council, one, allowing us to go forward, and for your approval tonight. We're grateful for you all approving this for us. Thank
Absolutely. Okay. Next on our agenda is, as I mentioned earlier, a work session. As has been our practice, work sessions are an opportunity for the council to have an informal discussion about an item that is not quite ready for prime time or for a decision. We don't take votes during work sessions. We don't receive public comment during work sessions. There will, as the manager mentioned in his memo, the idea here is to get feedback from the council so that he can bring this back in a more settled way for us to make a decision about on October 11th, which is our next meeting. And of course, at that meeting, there will be opportunity for public comment and some kind of decision to be made. Yes, Barbara.
And so Mayor or Mr. White, whoever wants to talk. October 11th, I'm seeing that date, but I feel like it's going to potentially even go beyond that date for the decision, just, depending on how everything goes, because we're 2 weeks out, and then we come back the 11th, maybe further discussion. Is there a hard deadline? Probably
We're not required to make a final decision on October 11th. Thank you for asking that, Barbara. I will say that's kind of our target for getting something on our agenda as a formal matter rather than inside of a work session. But if we have questions or ideas or more feedback for the manager, or we hear from the public at that time that sparks some new interest, like I said, there's no requirement to do it on the 11th. Thank you. All right, Mr. Manager.
The first item is a review of policies for the expenditure of American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. First agenda item is to present draft policies required for the expenditure of American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. And Arch McAdoo, our finance director, will present the item.
Welcome, Arch. I see you put on the power tie for us tonight. I see you put on the power tie for us
Power
tonight.
outfit. You better look at it.
Oh, we know how powerful that tie is, don't we?
All of it.
I was glad to see everybody again, and tonight, the first part of the meeting is, we got $6.7 million of our funding, and the government requires the council to adopt at least 7 policies in order to comply with the final rule that Treasury issued, and also to be in compliance with the uniform guidance. That is, the feds implemented the uniform guidance several years ago, and it governs all federal grant awards.
And Arch, before you get any farther, I want to just encourage you to maybe point that microphone a little more directly at you so that everyone can hear. Thank you very much.
Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. And so tonight, I'm not planning to get into the nitty-gritty details of the policies, but I want to do some highlights, or I call it a bird's eye view of what these policies are, what's in them, so that you may be able to turn to the policy that you want and hopefully wade through it that way. Before I start, I'd like to thank the School of Government for all the hard work that they did in preparing these policy templates for local governments in the state of North Carolina. I also would like to thank the work group that was made up of town staff and department heads that wade through a number of these policies, and we've had weekly meetings for a period of time now. And tonight is the council's turn to get involved. Let's see, Mary, you're gonna have to help me. Oh, I gotta go up here to slideshow. Okay. Let me skip over this. There are 7 policies in your book. I can't apologize for them being over 100 pages altogether, but that's the way they came out and stuff. And initially, I was going to send them to you one at a time, But then I decided, well, why don't we just give them all in one book, give them to them one time, so you can see how they interact with one another. The first policy is the eligible project policy that needs to be adopted. Second policy is allowable cost and cost principles. That stems directly from the Uniform Guidance, or UG. Program income, record keeping, property management, SERP award and monitoring, and conflict of interest. One of the things that is unusual about this grant is that we not only have to document how we spend the money, but we have always also got to document the decisions that we make. And that is different. I've never been involved with a grant where we had to document decision making. The first policy is eligible projects. In this policy, you will find the permissible uses of the funds. You will also find the prohibited uses. Last thing in this policy is there is a procedure for project approval. Allowable cost and cost principles. This stems from the Uniform Guidance. The Treasury is looking at a test of allowability using these 4 factors. That the cost must be reasonable. It must be for an eligible project. You must give consistent treatment throughout the application of generally accepted accounting principles. And must conform to any limitations or exclusions that is set in the awarding of the grant as to the types and amounts. In the allowable cost and cost principles policy, they have attached Exhibit A, where Exhibit A is 55 cost items that the feds have looked at, and they said those are appropriate for this program. The finance officer is responsible for determining the allowability and documentation requirements, as well as the pre-approval of any cost allowability. Ooh, I thought I corrected that, W. Okay. Program income is the third policy that's in your book. That is gross income that's earned by the town that is directly generated, by supported activity or as a result of the funds being awarded to the town. There are 2 ways in which you can use program income. They call it the deduction and the addition method. Whatever program income is earned, you can use that to deduct it from the grant award, thereby relieving Treasury of some of its obligations. The second way is to add it to your grant award to expand the funds available for your programs. The caveat here is that you must seek approval from Treasury in order to do that. The fourth policy is record keeping. Records must be maintained. Records must be maintained for 5 years, or until all the monies have been spent, or the monies have been returned to the Treasury. We are required to file an annual project and expenditure report. We filed the first one this past April. The final rule, guidance from Treasury is that they want to put us on the October 31st deadline along with everybody else. One key caveat here is that any contracts or SERP awards over $50,000 will need to be reported, in that annual report to them. Property management. Property management is a real tough policy. It has to, it applies, the Federal Uniform Grant Guidance Code applies to any property where federal funds are used in whole or part to acquire. The equipment and property that we acquire must be used for the original authorized purpose of the act. We will own the equipment, sort of. It would not be entitled to the federal government. There is a non-compete clause, which means that if we generate income and if we use these monies to provide a service that a private business would provide, we cannot do that at less than that private business price. We can't encumber the equipment without approval from Treasury. That is, we can't go out and buy some equipment, then turn around and pledge that as collateral on some financing that we might do. The management of equipment is going to require us to adopt a new policy model, a standard operating procedure in tracking equipment that we purchase from the issuance of the purchase order to the receival of that. There are a number of steps that we now have to perform in there. We have to make sure that it's insured, and the policy applies to if we get ready to dispose of the property. Sub-award and monitoring is the sixth policy. We are required to make a distinction, make a ruling on whether or not the agency is a subrecipient or contractor. Included with the policy as Appendix 1, starting on page 51, is a subrecipient and contractor classification list that we're required to complete. There's also assessment of risk. We have to consciously look and make a determination as to whether or not someone is low, medium, or high risk. Some of the factors that we'll have to look at is have they received grants from the federal government in the past? Have they had single audit findings that have not been corrected? Has the granting agency found them in non-compliance? And the assessment of risk, that the results of that will be used to develop a monitoring program. The subrecipient monitoring program, there's a monitoring form that we have to complete. That is Appendix 3 on page 56, and I apologize for cutting off the lead-in paragraph to that. I'll make sure that gets in the next rendition. There are provisions in there for intervention with recipients for noncompliance. And there is a sub-award agreement template that we are required to use. Conflict of interest, the policy includes state and federal standards. We are required to establish a conflict of interest point of contact who will oversee the entire conflict of interest programs. There is a duty to disclose, for any individuals involved in the selection, award, or administration of a contract or sub-award. If the contract or sub-award exceeds $250,000, we are required to get a conflict of interest disclosure statement. Next steps is to continue to review the policies and refine them. if the council would like, we're prepared to meet one-on-one or in small group briefings if you would like to get into this a little bit more. Our plan right now is to bring these back to you on October 11th for adoption. But if that doesn't work out, we'll come back whenever we get ready, or whenever you get ready. Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate you making a statement that, we don't have to approve this tonight, or there's no deadline.
Or on the 11th or whenever. There is a deadline about when we can spend the money, though, right? When we
Yeah,
have to
there
spend
is
the
a
money,
deadline
so
about when we can
we wanna
spend the
get it
money and
spent.
stuff,
I appreciate you taking us through those policies, Arch. I think, what's impressive is that our document ended up having to be 100 pages or so. But the regulations themselves are hundreds of pages. It's really incredible. So I have a lot of sympathy for you and your staff, and I appreciate all the work you've done with partners at the School of Government and others to make sense of all the rules so that we can actually get to the point of making the easy decisions about how to spend the money. So
That's the goal, Mr. Mayor. It's
right. I wanted to just, before you move on, Arch, I know you want to present this, I guess, the actual spending plan to us, or a proposed spending plan for us to kind of chew on a little bit. I see you, Barbara. Thank you. Just want to point out, especially bullet number 2 there on the slide that Arch shared. Really encourage council members, I plan to do this myself, to take advantage of the opportunity to sit down with Arch one-on-one or in a small group to just work through this, because it's complicated. And, we adopt an annual operating budget of what? Is it up to 25 million now? This is almost $7 million. I mean, this is a big chunk equivalent of our annual operating budget as a town. So I think it's really going to be a great resource for us to be able to sit down with Arch and or the manager one-on-one and just talk through any questions we have or anything we need to understand better about the new policies that Arch is proposing here or the spending plan that staff has come up with. Barbara, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Arch, for the presentation. I for sure am interested in the one-on-one. I'd love to do it with a small group. So looking forward to that. On the first page of the abstract, I'm looking at 9, 10, 11. It talks about Civil Rights Compliance Act and the protection of whistleblowers. Is that something you can go into a little bit more now, or would you do that one-on-one?
I would do that one-on-one.
Okay, so we'll save that for then. And in the sub-award and monitoring, and I believe record keeping, I know the School of Government was involved. You and I talked about that before the meeting, as well as yourself and your team. Mm-hmm. And there was a town work group.
Work group, yeah.
Right. So my question is, who monitors? I know we're also going to hire that grant administrator, and so just trying to tie in like the record keeping and who's going to monitor. I guess all this is because it's going to be. It appears like it's going to be a lot, right? So you got to have. So just wanted to know the role that folks play. That's my question. Thanks.
Yeah, overall, the monitoring about, and the key player and oversight in this is your finance officer. Yeah. And there's also a role for the town manager to play in this, such as related to any budget amendments that somebody might want to make or overall responsibility for the grants. The way it's written, town manager and the finance officer
You're on the
out front.
So is the work group pretty much done? I know the work group kind of.
No, the work group will keep right on. We probably won't meet this week, but based on what we hear here, there may be a lot more work for the work group to do.
Because there'll probably be an intake process of terms of folks applying for funding, that kind of thing, and the work group can certainly be a sounding board as you work through some of those processes and procedures to get this money out to the community.
Who's the grants administrator? Is that like they're going to be their primary? One of them, I guess.
That'd be, yeah. Well, we're looking for a grants administrator to really take over a lot of the monitoring and the compliance and reporting for this program. hopefully down the road, as this dwindles down and other monies rise up, we'll be able to shift that position over to the general fund budget.
Okay, that's good, Arch. Thank you so much. I look forward to
Unless we bring in lots and lots of grants, then we can
the
have.
small group briefings that we will, some of us will partake in, maybe all of us, I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for those quite good questions. I have up next Susan, I then have Randy, and then I have Eleazar.
Thank you, Arch. Just a few questions from me. First of all, let's talk about the grants manager. So that, I can't remember, have we already started advertising for that position? Okay, great. And is there a goal in terms of when you hope to bring that person on board?
By the end of, the position will close the end of this month. And so we'll look at the pool and see what we've got. And, my goal is to bring the person on as soon as we can.
I'm with you.
But I would add, though, that a lot of jurisdictions are recruiting grants managers to.
I was going to ask that question.
To address this grants program. And so when you look at the skill set that's going to be required, might be slim pickings out there, so it's a difficult position to fill right now. And I've given up visions of someone hitting the ground running because it will take, some effort to just orient them to all of the policies and the act itself.
Okay. We'll get the right person.
Yeah, we will.
Question on the work group. So the work group is comprised of many of our department directors here. And then it mentioned some other staff members. And are those folks who are selected in some way, or do they volunteer to be a part of the work group? How does that?
Well, they sort of volunteer. It comes from the department heads, depending, we were discussing stormwater. So Randy became part of the group. We were discussing, transportation issues. So, we were discussing climate change. And so those people, those that were specialists in those areas, they came and joined us. Yeah.
I see. Final question for you. The UNC School of Government, it sounds like they shared a template that was really helpful with this first step here. And will they continue to be a resource for us going through this and as questions arise? And
yes, the School of Government will continue to be a resource. They hold weekly office hours, just to talk about this grant. They continue to issue blogs and advisory statements on the grant. I would also say that we also get a lot of support from the North Carolina League of Municipalities. We get support from the Local Government Commission. We also get support from Treasury, believe it or not. They will come and they will hold information sessions to help us understand. The Treasury webinars are real important because Treasury continues to modify policies and things. And so they have to update their frequently asked questions. I just got dated July 27th, the latest frequently asked questions. And then on, I think it was July the 8th, I got a revised project and expenditure report guidance booklet. So this is a living animal, and I think this is new for the federal government, it's new for the states and the municipalities, and I think that Treasury's been as careful as they can. And I know the localities being as careful as they can because we don't plan on sending any money back to Washington.
Amen.
Well, we also, I think some of us saw today the story about what happened in Minnesota with some of this money that was misused. So I do understand the importance of this process, keeping us all transparent. So anyway, that's really helpful. I appreciate it. I'll be joining you for one of those small group meetings with Barbara.
Okay, next is Randy and then Eleazar.
Yeah. Thank you, Arch and Trish and other department heads and the manager. I'm impressed that you think it's a living animal. I think it's a beast. It is a beast. I've been trying to keep up with this by reading materials from the Brookings Institute and the National, was it League of Cities? And the way folks are trying to wrap their arms around it, depending upon what their individual circumstances are, it's tremendous. My question is, and this is really a simple question, it's actually a request for you and the manager. In order for me to be able to understand what the role of the grants manager is going to be, grants administration is going to be vis-a-vis the roles and responsibilities of everyone else, is it possible for you and the manager to put together a schemata of the workflow and the roles and responsibilities, a graphic because I want to be able to really understand how the components are going to be mechanized.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Yes, we can do that, but I will say we're creating this as we go along as well. I mean, it might be a conceptual plan, but
It'd be lots of rectangles.
Yeah, it will be a breathing document, if you will. But yes.
Lots of unnamed rectangles, but I think that that's a way to kind of systematize, the thinking as it's being created. I absolutely understand that, but that would be very helpful because as we go into this and look at the implementation to understand visually, how the cogs fit together. So I thank you for that because I really have taken abundant notes on this, and I think beyond the decisions we have to make is really what does the machine look like. So thank you.
One thing I would add is that the skill set that the individual we hire will have an impact upon that schematic also and how the car goes.
Thanks. Good question, Randy. Eleazar.
Yeah, I will echo my thanks for all the work already been done on these policies and look forward to this new person coming in and helping build that schematic. My question is more around the permissible uses of the funds, right? So I was looking through, and of course, number one is kind of funding to COVID-19 mitigation and prevention efforts. And maybe this is a one-on-one conversation or something I bring up later. But I was thinking of the possibility of using some of these funds to create long-standing policy of prevention with more around the lines of public health altogether, of course. And I'll use my example, right? So through the COVID pandemic, we saw that there was a lag in communications in multiple different languages, right? So knowing Carrboro is not full of people who only speak English, right? We do have several other languages. I was thinking of what is the possibility of using this funds to create a language equity program or policy or plan for the town that would be implemented and using kind of the funds here as seed money or seed funds to bring in experts who can create that plan so that the town can then adopt it as a public health situation, right? During COVID-19, we saw that the information lagged. Folks who were not English speakers did not receive all the information on time or at the same level as other folks, which led to either less use of resources or being late to receiving food or being late to signing up for vaccines, so on and so forth. So I'm thinking of a wider policy as this being kind of like the catapult to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we can look at that. But one thing I would, again, remind everybody, these are one-time monies. And the question I always ask people when they want to do something new, how will you sustain that when the money goes away? And that's a critical question that I look for an answer for.
Thanks for that question, Eleazar. It's a really great example of like how we can be thinking about whether it's new programs or setting up new systems based on what we learned through the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But then also keeping in mind the caveat of, okay, does it need extended sort of, so it's going to be a puzzle to put together, I think. But
Yeah,
go ahead, Eleazar.
exactly. That's why I was thinking of this as, we have, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 5 years to use this money. Maybe we bring in consultants, maybe we bring experts to help us build that plan. And in that meantime, we work with the town manager so that when this money does run out, we can implement that plan and start putting that into, or these systematic changes into place, so that hopefully there is not another situation where we're finding ourselves in a pandemic. But as public health overall, having these procedures in place, whether it's sending out information about an upcoming event for town, or whether it's critical information about an emergency situation going on now, we can have that already in place and not have, we'll learn from the lessons from COVID.
Yeah, a great question. Thank you, Eleazar. I'm going to go to Danny next since he hasn't spoken yet, but I do have you on the list to come back.
Danny. Hey, Danny.
Hey, Barb. Quick procedural question, just to clarify the agenda and what we'll be voting on tonight or the 11th. Is it my understanding that we need to approve these 7 policies, and then separately on the 11th we'll also be approving the tentative schedule, which we have not gotten into for the actual. I guess my question to the board is, if it is helpful, should we go ahead and approve these 7 policies? The policies, aside from the expenses, to me, seem ready to move. But I want to open that discussion.
We're definitely not doing that tonight. Let me just put that out there.
Okay, so that's not on the table tonight. That's not helpful.
On the
for these
agenda
7
tonight.
policies. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
But I take your point is that if we feel comfortable with the policy framework, even before we feel ready to do this actual spending plan, I don't see why I mean, they are separate agenda items. So I think we could do that approach.
Yeah, that's, I guess it seems like we're moving into discussion of
We're
line
about to
items,
get there.
and it seems like the 7 policies are broadly acceptable.
But both conversations can actually end up informing each other as we get into some more conversation around specific ideas for the spending plan. And that.
Right on.
Thanks,
Thank
Danny.
you.
The policies have to be adopted before you adopt the allocation plan.
That makes sense.
Can I make one observation on
Yes,
the
Nick.
policies? I think you all know this. One thing about the policies is that the United States government is telling us.
That's right.
The big struggle for you or challenge that's going to be interesting for you is how you spend. You know what I mean? And then these policies, and Arch has he's read about 2 or 3 times. I've read them once. And with the help of the Institute of Government, it tells you, well, given that you decide to spend your money in a particular way, then there are all these kind of procedures, right? And reporting requirements and limitations, wrinkles in terms of how that's executed. And about that, none of us have any choice. See, that's what these policies do.
Thanks for that reminder. Yep.
I just wanted you, as you think through this, that's a separate issue from this interesting question of, well, how do we spend?
Yeah. Okay, before I get back to Barbara real quick, any other people who haven't spoken yet? Sammy? No? Barbara?
Thank you, Mayor. Kind of like reminds me of 160D, like we really didn't, have a choice with that. It just came, we had to go along with it. But to Councilmember Now's point, it looks good, but I think for me, it's about having the opportunity to do the small group briefings and, get a few more questions answered, hear a little bit more information from Arch. But other than that, I don't see anything major. And also, Councilmember Posada's talking about this language equity or this language. And I just feel like that is something that would be good across the board and not just like during pandemic season, because we do have a community where people, are speaking more, more languages than just English. And so I think that could be good. And I think maybe we should try to figure out, once the money runs out, how we can sustain that, because it would serve a purpose, whether we're in a public health emergency or not. So I did just kind of want to, throw that in there. I think it should just be part of our communication plan somehow, and just kind of, put all that together. So I would kind of put that high, on the list of, and I know we have to figure out how to pay for it, after, the money runs out, but I just think it's worth it.
I agree with you. I think that's a good segue to get into the next discussion, which will be the proposed spending plan. But Mr. Manager, I saw your hand.
Yes, I just want to note that we are working on drafting a language access plan already as a part of the request to provide interpretation services. So Catherine Lazorko, our communication engagement director, is working on that right now as we speak. So
I think, as I was kind of saying earlier, what's I think really cool to me about this example is that it's the kind of example where we learned lessons during the pandemic about how people access information or resources or whatever that we can use to change our systems and processes. And there may be some one-time costs, for example, associated with changing those systems or processes, that once that change is made, it's kind of like, as Barbara was just saying, baked into the way that the town operates, so that it's not necessarily even an ongoing expense, although I don't want to say there's not going to be ongoing expense, but I'm just saying hypothetically, there could be a program like that where we've learned lessons, changed the way the town operates as a result of learning those lessons, and then that there may or may not be an ongoing expense related to implementing a plan coming out of that. But anyway.
I understand.
Okay. So I just want to appreciate the example again, because I think there may be other examples like that that will come up in these one-on-one conversations as well as in our questions from. But I don't want to get ahead of you, Arch, or you, Mr. Manager, and moving on either with this item or to the next agenda item.
You ready for the next item?
You are. Yep.
Okay. You ready? The next item is a grant project ordinance for expenditure of the ARPA coronavirus funds. The first item is to present to the town council, and I want to underscore a proposed allocation of funds for your consideration and potential adoption on October 11th, 2022.
That one. Okay.
Yes, sir. Braxton. Not tonight. Tonight is just a work session.
Well, one thing I want to say, Braxton, before you put this thing out, the citizens should be able to look at this document.
Okay. Thank you for saying that, Braxton.
About that.
Yeah. So the plan is for us at the work session to just have a conversation with the manager, sort of informal, to give some feedback about this proposal. But then we're not making any decisions tonight. This is going to come back to us with an opportunity for public comment before any decisions are made about either the policies that Arch presented or any spending plan that comes out of it. So there will be public.
You don't get a hold of that document.
So I think we'll make sure, both as part of tonight's agenda materials as well as any future meetings where we want input, this proposed plan will be available for the public to look at. Am I getting to your question right, Braxton?
Yeah, but how do we come up here and make a request for the plan?
It'll be available, I think, in the usual ways that all of our meeting materials are available. But I think, Mr. Manager, maybe you can address this question about public access to this information.
Yes, once we have, I guess, your feedback, we can put a proposed spending plan out, say, on the website and inform the public that it's there for comments. But as you mentioned, once it comes back to council, that'd be an opportunity for the public to come and make additional comments on the plan before you adopt it.
Yeah.
And I will say the work we've done has taken into account all of the public engagement we've done up to this point through our community survey, through our BIPOC roundtables. There have been a number of ways we've solicited information to get to the spending plan tonight.
And then just to reiterate that, first of all, at the meeting on the 11th, there will be public comment. And it's not for sure that we'll even make a decision that night, depending on what we hear. But we definitely want to be hearing from you before then, too, Braxton. So we'll try to get as much information out about what's on the table right now before then as we can, including what you hear tonight. Okay. Arch?
You ready to move forward? Okay. Ms. Manager, did you have any comments before I start? Okay. Okay, next agenda item is a draft grant project orders for use of the funds. I'd like to do three things tonight. One is share with you the current allocation, how we've used the monies today, or how we allocated them, even though we haven't spent them. And then I would like to talk a little bit about the revenue replacement category in the Act. I'd like to pull that out. And then we will move into the proposed uses. I'll do a high-level summary. Department heads are here for specific questions about any specific projects. Okay. When we initially got our monies, we brought a grant project orders to you, and then we came back in June. And this is the way you had allocated the money. The only program that is active, really, is the small business grants. We started with $300,000, and then the advisory, the review committee asked y'all to authorize $26,000 more, which you did. So we spent $326,000 on small business grants. The premium pay allocation, once we got more information on the rules and the reporting requirements, we looked at it and said, no, we can't do that. So we used general funds to cover that. This revenue replacement dollar amount, $1.8 million, that was calculated with that real complex formula that they gave us. And then they came out with a different final rule, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the rest of it, has just been, unassigned. And so what we're trying to do now is to get all of it assigned for expenditure. Okay, let me talk about the revenue replacement. You saw the $1.8 million previously where we had calculated using their formula. The final rule, Treasury says, you can use up to $10 million or your entire grant allotment for revenue replacement, whichever is less. I understand one of the reasons they made that change was that there were a number of smaller jurisdictions that when they used the formula, they came up with zero revenue replacement monies. And so, and we can use the revenue, they relaxed the rules again in terms of the use of revenue replacement. And that is to be used for the provision of any government services that you would normally be expected to use. But even though the feds say that whatever that government service is, it's got to be authorized by state law, as well as any activities we undertake. There's got to be a basis in state law for that. The reason I'm talking about revenue replacement is because that is the most flexible category of spending with the fewest uniform guidance compliance requirements. Program income, property management, subawards, procurement, suspension, and debarment. It's not specifically addressed in the policy, but it is in the uniform guidance. Those we would recommend, since our award is less than $10 million, it's $6.7 million, our recommendation would be to use it all as revenue replacement.
And then we have freedom to use our general fund money.
To a certain degree, but the uniform guidance requirements will still be there. And there's some other things, and I think I have a slide on that. Okay, these are the compliance requirements for using revenue replacement. And those are applicable to all of the categories. We would have to comply with the award terms and the conditions of the grant. It would have to be an eligible use in the act. We still got to spend them by the deadline. We still have to do reports. We still have to maintain the records. We still have to maintain conflict of interest management. Civil rights compliance we would have to adhere to. The Hatch Act and protection of whistleblowers or any other regulation, state, federal regulation that was required of us. That's why we're looking to suggest doing revenue replacement. It's the simplest and easiest one, and it also helps, if we get into a situation where we are doing sub-awards with nonprofits and stuff, then it eases their reporting burden also. It removes them from having to do a single audit. So that's why we're suggesting that we go this way. As the manager mentioned earlier, the goal of, our goal, with the work group was to align the needs that have been identified to us from by the work group, nonprofit agency interviews, the BIPOC roundtables, various surveys we issued. We had some community engagements, and we heard a lot from the community about the needs. And so we took those needs and we were looking at the act and what was eligible. And so our challenge was just to try to get things to line up as best we could. Okay, and because we're suggesting, going to be recommending using revenue replacement, we did not use the categories that spelled out in the act. What we did was we used the functional categories that we use in our budget, so that it's clear that we're doing government services and stuff. And this is how the allocations is summarized so far. We have allocated everything except for $1 million, a little over $1 million that's still in unassigned. In your package, you have the details under each one of these functional areas. Okay. Okay. We do need some guidance from the council tonight in terms of, as we go forward, we had several questions. Do we want to set a fixed date for all applications or maintain an open-ended process? The application review, we were looking at using committees of staff to do the evaluations and then float them up to me and the attorneys for the final ruling on those. Then the question became, well, what about the role of the advisory boards and commissions? The more people we get involved with reviewing and having a conversation about this, the longer it will take to get the money out the door. So we need some balance on that. Another question, area where we need some guidance is on, do we set dollar limits for each category or activity? Do we have a minimum or maximum? I know in the small business grants programs, we identified a maximum for those people, but as we look at the larger community, I'm not, we just need some feedback on that. Will the council want the approval of all program requirements in addition to those that would be required by the Act?
Can you say a little bit more about that last one, Arch?
Can
you say a little bit more about that number 4, the one that you just, what is it you need feedback on there?
Basically, does the council want to approve all of the programs that we fund?
Like every single one?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, not approval, but approve the guidelines.
Oh, I see.
That we use, like with the small business grants, you approved the outline of it, then you came back and approved the application and the guidelines, you know, and the requirements for applying for that, you know, and that's what I mean. I'm not meaning every individual program, you know, we just need some guidance.
Right.
You know, and you give us that guidance, then we'll go and do the rest of it. Okay. So, next steps. We need to review and finalize the proposed expenditures at some point. The staff needs to continue working on the internal process for the receipt and processing of the request. All requests, must be made in writing according to policy number 1, and it requires several actions to be taken. And then the adoption of the spending allocation or the grant ordinance October 11th at your meeting, maybe. I'm hearing them, but the ears working fine. Okay.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there.
Okay.
Right. Arch, thank you very much. So we have some areas where Arch is seeking some guidance from us. I know council members have also developed some lists of questions that they have or thought ideas they have that they wanted to share and maybe get your reaction to. So we have some time to do that here this evening. Sammy?
Thanks, Arch. Just take a step back and get clarity on what you're proposing. Replacement of full revenue would allow us to be unconstrained by the federal guidelines. Am I understanding that?
No, it's not, I didn't say unrestrained. I said there would be less of a reporting requirements and compliance requirements. There would, the list that I put up were.
I guess specifically, one of the requirements I want clarity on is the categories of use that this money can be spent on. So if we're replacing our revenue, does that mean that we are freeing up our general fund for purposes and we're just choosing to use guidelines of this original grant as like what categories we want to spend in?
Well, if you used all the revenue replacement to pay for things that you would normally pay for with the out of the general fund, you would still have to spend general fund money to carry the activities out under the act with fewer constraints.
Okay.
That's not what I'm proposing.
Okay.
What I'm proposing is that we be straightforward. 1, we make the election to use all of our grant for revenue replacement. Then, once we do that, we can use that for normal governmental expenses.
It's not, if I can sort of expand on that, Sammy, it's not instead of what we would already be spending the general fund on, but it's in the categories of government services that we would normally be spending money on, right? So like in our budget every year, right, our annual operating budget, what are those categories we usually spend money in? The idea, I think, is to use those same categories to define how we're spending the ARPA money. But it's not taking the place of existing expenditures. It's on top of existing expenditures.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
That's helpful. So in regard to specific, well, firstly, just to address your questions to the council in terms of guidance, I'm fine with the way that we've done. Those are more specifically about grants, right, to nonprofits and.
It's the entire grant program.
Right.
And how we spend them. If we decide to use Sept awards, if we decide to fund a nonprofit that has financial difficulties, in that case, they would be the beneficiary. not a cert recipient.
But then there are other ones where we would be using them for our own programs, right? And so are you asking about the specifics of those programs themselves too, or more generally about these
I'm
subgrants?
talking about the grant, the arrow monies. I'm not talking about any other programs.
So for example, police is talking about use of force training. When on number 4, you're saying council approval of program requirements. You're basically like asking to what degree we want to have a say.
Yeah, to what degree do you want to have a say? Because
Yeah.
Once you approve the allocation of the grant monies, you have approved the program.
Okay, got it. So, okay, now getting into this.
If you approve the grant ordinance that's in there, you are approving all of those activities to be funded.
So, and for me, it varies. I mean, I can't say overall one way or another. I think each one has a different degree of participation by the council. So that's my answer for number 4, my personal preference. And then specifically, I've got 2 that I've focused on. I don't know if you weren't included in the email, but one's a question for our police chief, specific to the use of force training allocation. And I just wanted to get a sense of, in the spirit of really being able to experiment or set something up, as Eleazar was describing, that might have legs to live on. I think there's an opportunity, as represented by SORAD and the work they currently do with housing, to expand that work into mental health, given, especially since COVID had such a big impact with mental health. As we've seen so many other programs throughout the country, like Durham currently has that rapid response team. And I'm not so much interested in a training, but rather a upstaffing of SORAD, so it has the capacity to go beyond housing, and obviously like staffing and training associated with doing the mental health component. And I could imagine leveraging ARA money for this federal grant money from Chapel Hill, if they were to match, in proportion to their population, to do this added component to SORAD. So that's what I'm interested in learning about from the chief. If what you're proposing here, to what degree does it approximate what I just described or not? And then the other thing I'm interested in, also included in the email, had to do with the broadband expansion as the opportunity for providing it for free as a means for making housing more affordable, because housing includes utilities. And included here are 2 expansions. One, I thank you for the response, Mr. Manager, and I imagine Andy, you were involved in that response too. But one is, making it so we have a more resilient system. So tapping into along Merritt Mill to the power plant as a way to have 2 connections to UNC. And I need more understanding of the Rogers Road one, because it sounds like the intention there is somehow to dead end at a place where the county will eventually connect. And so my interest is, how far in the future is that? And are there better uses of that money for more immediate needs in terms of broadband expansion? For example, getting to affordable housing places in town. And so I would like some more exploration to that. And in response to my question, Mr. Manager answered that there's some work for some expert consulting that would need to happen to have a better engineered program. And I think that maybe that's a good use for this money to make the plan for how to provide broadband to affordable housing communities within town. So I look forward to continuing and hearing during this meeting any feedback to these ideas, both by staff and the council, but over these next 2 weeks, further developing those ideas for consideration and inclusion. Those are my first responses to what you all are proposing tonight. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing.
Great, thanks, Sammy, for that, for those two specific topics. It's helpful to have your thinking on exactly what those two, where you're coming from on both of those things. And I guess as Sammy was speaking, I'm wondering, and maybe Mr. Manager, you can help me out with this in terms of what you're hearing from council tonight. Is it helpful? I think I found it helpful to hear what Sammy just said in reacting to what he's seen in the proposed spending plan and maybe offering a different perspective or a different idea or another idea on top of that. And maybe, is that useful to you to hear that from us as we kind of go round robin here, and maybe you take that information that you hear from us tonight or these proposals and see what you can cobble together or make recommendations or have your staff respond to what you've heard tonight? Or is there another method that you think would be helpful for you here tonight?
So in the interest of time, I don't know how much of that you have tonight in terms of all council members, but staff is here to answer your questions tonight. It'd be easier to do it in person and try to go back and write all this up. But for example, Sammy's two items, we're prepared to respond, to give a response.
Okay.
And so if there are specific topics like that, we're here to can respond tonight to some of this. That'd be
Great.
helpful.
So maybe as you hear from us, each of us tonight, you can be clear with us which ones you're ready to share some information about. Sounds like you have some information to give to us regarding Sammy's ideas. And which ones you might need a little more time to dig into before you give a response.
Yes, I'll look at our department heads and say that if you're not prepared tonight, be willing to say that. But if you do have information, let's share what we can tonight. So the first two items I think were around SORAD, with police chief is here, and Andy is here as well for broadband. So if you're...
Welcome up, Chief. So it sounds like Sammy is interested in to what extent this proposal and the spending plan here for a mental health response pilot program can be thought of as a way of enhancing our existing resources or access that we have to the SORAD program with Orange County.
Good evening. I just want a point of clarification. You said use of force, and I don't think you meant that. I think you meant mental health.
Yes.
Asset. So I just want to clarify that just in general.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I read your mind, but yeah. So
And
do
Chief,
you want...
be sure to speak into the microphone there.
Excuse me. You also... Are you curious about the use of force too because you mentioned that, or was that just an error?
That was an error.
Okay.
I'm interested in it.
Correction.
Okay. Yeah. Just, okay.
Well, we'll get to use of force.
Okay. So the grant position, or excuse me, the ARPA position for mental health position would be one, and this was to be embedded in the police department. Would work with the police department and kind of bring the multidisciplinary aspect to it to kind of round out the model and the there's the model of external assets and internal assets. And so I don't want to go down a road too far in terms of pros and cons, but I will say to you that every morning when I sit in my office and I read our reports from the previous day, I always think we could use some real follow-up there. We could really use some real follow-up here. And it would be very nice to be able to direct an asset that would say, hey, look, we would say, look, here's your job. I need you to follow up with these folks. And it would be very beneficial. The other aspect of it, too, and I hadn't really thought about it before, but we had an incident with a retired law enforcement officer last week from Orange County, is mental health for our officers. And a lot of officers are reticent about, we don't have a lot of police officer social worker hangouts. And so this could almost be a bridge to officers working with a social worker in a common goal of rounding out, bringing a multidisciplinary approach to our service provision. And as you know, in the last 2 years especially, we've really been hammered with a lot of people with multifaceted crises, right? And we're about 2 years out, is what Kate Venhagen said today, from that crisis diversion. I've got my fingers crossed. I'll go dig holes if I need to, because we need it. And so my thinking is anything that we can do to provide that well-rounded service is something that I want to push down the road.
Thank you, Chief. And do you understand those external assets, as you described, the model of SORAD, for example, as a potential means for addressing what you're describing within the police department now in terms of offsetting those needs of follow-up and relating to mental health as the police department currently relates to it?
Right. So we work with SORAD, and Kate and I guess we meet quarterly with the Justice Advisory, and we also have other crisis diversion or crisis intervention units. So we are frequently in contact. We have called SORAD. One of the challenges, as you know, is resourcing. So the question is, if we have a bridge from this time to they can be there in an hour, what do we do with that time? How do we maintain the safety of a person? If it's not enough to seek emergency services, but it's that bridge to something else. And that can be one of the resource gaps that we see. So a lot of times at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 3 o'clock in the morning, you have a different resource, options. And so that's the challenge in general. I would say that an internal social worker with an external social worker is just another ring. It's completing the entire service provision, because I think most of us see that a lot of these situations, law enforcement is there for the safety of everyone, to get it to where then we can bridge it to something else. An internal asset and an external asset would both provide those services. There are pros and cons to each. I'd be happy to work up thoughts on that. Kate and I talk a lot. But I do think there is a specific benefit to having an internal one within the police department.
Great, thanks for those responses. I think my interest, and maybe this gets to the question that Arch asked in terms of guidance, which way to go, is for the council to give direction in terms of where we would like to go in terms of what the work is in the police department, independent of those nuances that you best know and Kate knows. But I've seen models like in Portland and now in Durham of these rapid response teams, and maybe if the direction we had was we want that to exist for us too, then the question is, how are we going to get there? And perhaps there's some steps, or perhaps they're not. I mean, these models exist. Perhaps there's some consultation with those entities that have already done it in terms of how to get there, and potentially some funding of SORAD. And then in the spirit of making sure it's sustainable, when this money dries up, the hope is that we will have displaced the burden on our police department through what SORAD's taking up, and the money that we currently allocate for staffing of our police department is reallocated staffing of SORAD. Does that make sense? And so I think that's kind of the way in which I don't have the wherewithal to tell you exactly. I mean, you just demonstrated like some of these nuances that I just don't know about. And so that would be kind of the way in which I could envision us giving direction in terms of heading towards a SORAD rapid response kind of team for Chapel Hill and Carrboro. I don't know if it would be countywide given the distance issues.
I will say one of the challenges, if you look at the population density, right? So the southern part of the county has a lot more people per square mile as, say, the top 3/4.
Right.
That is one of the challenges. You look at which model is best to provide the services that you want for that area. And
Yeah, exactly.
that'll be part of that
Another
assessment.
example of those nuances. Okay, I look forward to continuing this conversation and hopefully with our colleagues on the Chapel Hill Council and the police chief in Chapel Hill and Kate and SORAD, and like making this happen because we have the funds to work with. Thank you.
Thanks, Sammy. So on the specific topic of the mental health response pilot idea, Elizar.
Yeah. First, thank you for talking a little bit about the nuances. If you can also send me some information on that, because I would want to understand that more fully. And I'm fully kind of following Councilmember Slade's comments. I'm on board with having internal assets, or whatever we want to call them, social workers, folks who know how to deal with mental health crises in in our department. But I'm thinking of a both and situation, right, where we use some of these reserve or unassigned to have a conversation. Maybe it's SolarAd, maybe it's some other organization. I don't know what it looks like, but in this, as a stopgap measure, 5 year, well, the time remaining on this program, we can find a way to work with someone who will increase capacity to serve the folks here in Carrboro, kind of make that as part of the agreement. I don't know if that's possible. I'm spitballing here, but I'm very much in line with using outside agencies and third parties who have done this work, who only dedicate to this work, who have no ties to kind of like our governmental system, while still having folks in, eventually working towards having a safe, sustainable unit in Carrboro. But in the meantime, really working on this, because that is a tremendously important issue for me, is specifically knowing that many folks, renters and low-income folks who have been devastated by the pandemic are dealing with mental health issues, and talking with some of my friends in mental health arena, how services for low income folks have just skyrocketed in need, but not in ability. And that doesn't translate specifically to this program, but that does have has a way in how we're responding to some of the calls, specifically here in Carrboro.
I respond to that.
Go ahead, Chief.
I was going to say the both and model is kind of the ideal for me, because the social worker internally would be able to speak the same language as a social worker in the countywide. And so that would, even if there was a bridge to services, that would provide better communication, better nuance in the field of mental health. Whereas an officer does the best they can with the training they have, the CIT and all that, and their experience to pass on what they can, but having that ability for the same, the same code, if you will, would be a benefit. So the both and is I think a win-win.
Yeah, and I would just say that, as I know this is a draft, but as we move forward, I would definitely like to see that reflected on this.
I think before we move on, Chief, I think I'm really resonating with what both Sammy and Eliza are saying here. And I think part of it could just be being clear about what this program, as you envision it, I know it's early days, right? It's a proposal or whatever, but being clear about what its intention is and what it looks like. Because what I hear and what's resonating for me is this idea of building up the capacity of the department in such a way that it complements the work that so many of our other sort of diversion, deflection, harm reduction folks in the county are doing, both in Chapel Hill as well as with the SORAD program and Kate's other programs at the county. To the extent that any new capacity in our department, it will exist, to the extent that it can be supportive of or bolstering those services and using the same kinds of programs that they're using. To me, that's the most attractive option. You said something really interesting too, and related to this, it also had to do with care and support for our officers, for our employees. And I think that's a great idea too. I think that is probably a separate function though, right?
Yes.
Probably. And
Yes.
I want to make sure that you're thinking of that as a separate function.
Yes, yeah, I just want to, it would open the door
Right.
to officers talking to social workers, which not as it would be a job task for that person.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Make sure I was
Yes.
clear on that.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. So wait. Go ahead, Susan. That's fine.
Just one question while we're still on this topic. You mentioned a little while ago, Chief Atek, about the crisis diversion facility possibly being built in 2 years' time. And I'm not sure if this is a question for you or our manager, but do we know for sure that the county will be paying the total cost of that facility, or should we be setting aside funds so that we can partner for that facility?
I think we don't know.
We don't know.
Right, we don't know, yes.
Okay.
To be continued. Yeah. It's a great question there, Susan. Before I let you go, I know that I have a quick question about the item that you've called use of force training. It sounds like
Yes.
Barbara has a question as well. My question is just real quick. Can you just be clear about what that is?
Sure.
Because when I see that, I hope what that is
Right.
de-escalation.
It should be
training
called
and,
use of
like-
force decision-making training,
Okay.
right? And that's what, yeah, and you can put, and this de-escalation is part of that. So basically what this is a replacement of a computer system that's designed to train officers to communicate under stress, to make decisions under stress, to de-escalate under stress, to take critical incidents from start to finish, so that we're training them in all the aspects of, one, trying to reduce, de-escalate as much as we can, to take the temperature out of the room, to reduce the emotion, so that they're communicating well. Because communicating under stress can be a challenge, and it's one of those skills that's perishable, and we like to train on that. We like to make sure our officers are able to do that. And these are all these critical skills that when you do that, this is what this system is designed to train and maintain.
I think being clear about that and being clear, in my mind, what's important about that is the goal of that
Yes.
is to reduce uses of force
Yes.
or the need for
Okay.
uses of force. Right. So, Barbara, go ahead.
So thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief Atek. And so ditto what the mayor said. That kind of jumped out at me in a way that didn't land very well. And so if we could just get that wording changed and so folks understand that it's, I guess, de-escalation and behavior modification maybe when you're in these high-stress situations.
It's communication. It's all the
and
things that we
communication, yes.
want to get the highest chance of success in a situation.
Okay.
Yes.
And so I'm looking at number 2, when you talk about the role of the advisory boards and commissions. And so I continue to connect with our community safety task force. They have a charge, to review, make recommendations, whatever. We're just getting started really good. But I want to connect all of this with them, potentially other advisory boards. I think this is an opportunity for that. With the items that you have here, the use of force de-escalation training, the mental health response pilot program. So I'm just wondering how we can tie that and get some kind of conversation going with the community safety task force or a way in. I see number 2 is kind of sort of going in that direction, but I don't know if that's what I see Danny saying.
I do in this case. I like the idea, Barbara, as you said, of incorporating some comment from our community safety task force on the items that you've proposed here, because they do very much fall in line with the charge of the task force and the interests I know of the members of the task force, and in the way that we want to sort of rethink some of the work of the department. And so it's a great opportunity, in my mind, as Barbara's saying, to make sure as you get to the point of developing whatever these programs are, looking for the guidance and feedback of the advisory board.
And I think too, one of those general broad provisions was for future allocations from feedback from the Community Safety Task Force. That was where that bigger section is. It is an example of the Criminal Justice Debt Program, right? That was something that started externally and is now part of the process. And that's some of that funding is allowing for the future creation of stuff of programs like that. If that makes sense.
And I had one more question.
Go ahead, Barbara.
The unassigned amount, and so we can start talking about that too. That's all part of this, like we could potentially want that to go. I think that's all I had now. Mainly it was for I think mainly it was for Chief ATAC. Is Charles in here?
It's the whole new Charles.
I might have a question or two for
Barbara, are we ready to move
him.
on from Chief ATAC at this point?
Yeah, because that'll be later.
Okay,
That
Danny,
can be
go
later.
ahead.
This was not so much for, it does pertain, but I doubt you'll be the answer. This is really for the board and for the manager. So questions 2 and 4 here, application review, program requirements. It does seem like our discussion is falling along kind of different considerations for public safety program. Are 2 and 4 where we might address this, where we might say public safety expenditures here are subject to board recommendation and perhaps a higher level of council scrutiny than perhaps the relocation of underground fuel tanks? Is that kind of what we're asking?
Well, I think, Sammy kind of hinted at this earlier when he said that it's kind of, I think these different categories, some categories the council is going to have more interest in sort of having a discussion about than other categories.
So I guess toward that answer, is it reasonable for us maybe to, like, trying to consolidate what I'm hearing to answer these 4 things this evening? Might we be saying that looking at these categories, considering the work that we're doing, where we have, those seem to me not just, not like necessarily the most contentious, but this is where we have like a lot of programmatic thinking going in new directions and sort of probably some unarticulated vision in public safety. Right. Relative to a lot of this is kind of extensions of the comprehensive plan and stuff like facility improvements, things like that. Not even
straightforward, yeah.
Yeah. So public safety, our vision for public safety is pretty implicated in like an ongoing way, in a way that maybe we're not as totally on the same page with other kinds of expenses. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe toward answering 2 of these 4, I would put forward, I would want public safety expenditures reviewed by the relevant advisory boards, and I would want increased programmatic oversight for the board for public safety expenses of ARPA money. Yeah,
that's good. I think that's good feedback.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Go ahead. I think that's good feedback. Yeah.
I think racial equity and public safety probably are the relevant ones, and I could be persuaded that there are some I'm not thinking of.
Well, I think as we get into some of the other categories, we may have thoughts about that too. So, yeah. Sammy.
So in terms of feedback on police public safety questions and the specific allocation that in this line item, if we're going to be actually being able to reflect whatever feedback we do get and we're being asked to perhaps approve of this October 11th. I'm not sure that the relative, the Public Safety Task Force will have time enough to give us the feedback in terms of the amount that is listed here. Because one thing that comes to mind, if the model I described, which is to staff up SORAD, think about two salary positions potentially. I don't really know what the current burden in terms of mental health is for a police department, but the idea is to offset that with SORAD. I imagine it would be more than what is listed here. And so I just want to make sure that in our process, we're able to, whatever avenue we decide going down, we're able to reflect that in the numbers that we're allocating.
I think, and I'm just kind of imagining here, when we get to the point of approving the proposed spending plan in a few weeks or longer, that what we're talking about approving in that step is essentially what you're hearing us give the chief feedback on tonight, which is, we like the idea of something in the department that complements the work that you see happening in the other agencies and making that relationship work better, some kind of de-escalation, use of force reduction training or whatever, but that the council will expect to have some approval down the line of this, whatever that specific program looks like. Does that make sense, Mr. Manager? As well as some input from the relevant advisory board.
But my point is the money to actually
Now, I get
be
that.
left
That-
over.
that is
to
a tricky.
use.
That is a tricky point you're making there. I was trying to elide it a little bit, but Mr. Manager, you have any thoughts?
Yes, it sounds like we would bring back a concept, I guess, of what this might look like to council to make sure we're in line with what your thinking is. I think is what I'm hearing. Is that pretty much it?
Well, I think what Sammy is suggesting is that what your response to what you're hearing here might lead to a different dollar amount in those line items.
Yes, yes, absolutely. We'll line up to the budget, but we just make sure we got the programmatic piece in line, and then we'll assign the appropriate funding to it to achieve that goal.
And it may be down the line, Sammy, that even that number is not quite hitting the target, right? And we have to figure it out. But at least we can get somewhat closer in the next round of whatever this spending plan is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, if maybe I'm not understanding what we're approving on October 11th. It sounds like this spreadsheet is part of that or not.
It is. But we're talking about how we modify this spreadsheet. Right
We
now.
can modify it, okay.
Yes,
And we can make sure that we're going to have something to modify.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, October 11th is a target date. You don't have to do it that night,
Yeah.
but as soon as
Okay.
possible, but that's target date.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification.
Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to go back to a point that Susan made, that we don't know regarding SORAD what the county is planning to spend and whether or not they expect us to be full partners or they're taking it on completely. I think we need that information. I also think I'd really like us to explore whether or not I like the idea of bridging. I think it's really important to have the internal as well as the external, which may mean even if we wanted to engage in an agreement with the county for SORAD to have social workers that are within our own sphere may be important. I think, it may shift over time, but I think initially having people who really know Carrboro, who are engaged in Carrboro, will be really important during a transition period. So I just don't want us to be jumping into something that that is still yet to be designed. And we're really at that point. And as long as we go into it knowing, there's so much we don't know. I think to start off, I would, and I like that Barbara put it this way, I would just change the language from use of force training and the de-escalation and the diversion, and look at the the harm reduction terminology there, and that way, should we be at a point in 2 weeks to need to approve funding, it's broad enough that it could go in another direction. I don't want us to box ourselves in before we even really know what we're doing, because we do have a timeline for spending. We don't have to have a timeline for when we approve it, but we do have a timeline for spending, so it makes sense if it's a broad enough category that we, as it's being created now, as it's being recommended through the Community Safety and Law Enforcement Task Force, we can modify. Thanks.
Thanks, Randy. I had a thought and I've lost it. It'll come back. I guess one thing I wanted to be clear about is the county's diversion facility is still, I mean, that's something they're working on, but we don't know really the details of how they're going to do that, when they're going to build it, what it's going to look like, how they're going to pay for it. The street outreach program, the SORAD program, is an up and running thing. And I'm hoping, Mr. Manager, you could remind us that we just agreed to funnel a whole chunk of money to them in our 23 budget. And was that coming out of ARPA? Or was that coming out of somewhere else?
General fund money. We took the general fund.
We're already contributing significantly to the street outreach program for, well, SORAD is sort of focused on getting people who are experiencing homelessness into different situations, right? And I take your point, Sammy, that it'd be nice to be able to expand their capacity even more. So I just want to be clear that we're talking about, right, the diversion facility, which is kind of a mystery at this point in some ways, versus an up and running program that I think there are opportunities for our department to be interfacing with a little more effectively. Danny?
And I think, Mayor, that's exactly, like, that's the conversation where I think what we need to put in place is like our oversight practice here, because I think what we got into in that conversation is that we also have some work to do as a board with the county. Like, that we're talking about, like, housing, racial equity, public safety, Chapel Hill County, you know, like the intersection of those three boards, departments, and municipalities. I mean, there's like 9 stakeholders here. So I mean, I think
what I'm hearing, it's just to avoid having Chief ATAC stand here until 11 o'clock tonight, just try to sum up here is, you're hearing an interest from council, Mr. Manager, in knowing more about what these 2 proposed programs will look like, and having an opportunity built into the design of those programs or the allocation of those dollars from our Community Safety Task Force, as well as from the council, about how that will ultimately get spent. And you've kind of, I think you've got a sense, for example, with the use of force thing, just being clear that that's about de-escalation, et cetera. With the mental health pilot program, how is that going to expand the capacity potentially of our relationship with county and with Chapel Hill? And as Sammy mentioned, even looking beyond housing support. So, are we good there?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe this line item will have a different number associated with it when we see it next time. Chief, thank you very much. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Andy. We had a question from Sammy about the broadband proposals.
Thank you.
I'll try to be very quick about this. So we're considering 2 different paths, a Merritt Mill path and a Rogers Road path. And together they cost $500,000. The Merritt Mill path is probably about the $300,000 portion of it, and the Rogers Road's $200,000. And in Merritt Mill, it's to extend the path to the cogen plant on the UNC campus, and that's to provide us redundant connection to the NC-REN network, or give us redundant internet connectivity, which, as everybody knows, everything's trending towards the cloud. Everything's going to be in the cloud. That connection is very important. You can kind of see the logic, and that would be a good thing to have. The Rogers Road is basically connecting it back to the core of our network and putting a path in place for that. And our regional partners such as UNC, the school system, Chapel Hill, Orange County have expressed like, hey, that Rogers Road conduit is kind of a good location. At one point, Orange County was very interested in building towards Chapel Hill a network that would come towards, because obviously connecting this population back to the Hillsborough and then onward. Because of what they're doing in the north part with broadband, that's probably going to be, you were asking about how quick is that going to occur? It's probably more like a 10-year off type thing right now. A lot of these things that the town does is, all you know, we put these things in place, and within a decade, 2 decades, they become very used. And it's just a very smart practice to put these things in when you have the ability to do it. And that's why that Rogers Road exists out there. Then also, there's obviously a school system a school out there that can be connected back through that system. They're also receiving a lot of money right now. So that's a potential that they could take advantage of now, maybe. And then Chapel Hill also to help get a redundant path to their public works. But they were going to tag on with what Orange County was going to do, and that was going to split the cost. It's not a priority for them. So really the only real thing that's going to happen potentially in the immediate future with that path would be the school system, and they're not like knocking on our door saying, hey, can we get it connected? So the reality is that's probably $200,000 you could divert to something else, or the whole amount, whatever you thought as a group was best to do. Two things I want to say quickly about that is, number one, what you're thinking of doing that, it's very doable. Depending on what your scope is, depending on what your thought of connectivity was for these residents, stuff like that. So we need to start thinking about that and talking about that very specifically, very quickly. Number one. Number two, we have actually been working on this because we have a similar situation already where literally there is a affordable housing unit that they're actually digging around our conduit. It's very simple to bring a lateral in there and provide this type of connectivity. And we've been talking to Nick, and this is part planning and our housing unit and IT have come together and discussed this. And I don't know if you feel comfortable discussing, or if you recall our conversations on that, Nick. Is that something where we're not really sure if legally, because the town doesn't own this housing, how we can address that? But I think possibly we can address that, giving them connectivity. Is that something we can talk about, Nick, or that you can elaborate on, or is this something that's not in your mind right now?
Not in my mind.
Okay. I can tell as I'm speaking to you. I'm sorry. I apologize for putting you on the spot.
Right. So, Andy, it sounds like that particular point that Sammy had asked about in terms of providing some more connectivity for affordable housing communities would be something we'd be interested in learning more from staff about in terms of the legal.
Yeah, and it involves very much the planning department and our housing department and kind of policy. It's a longer thing that I think can be tackled, but immediately it may be hard to address.
It sounds like
Me and then Danny.
the money, the opportunity we have here is perhaps to, as the manager was alluding to, is enlist consultants who could really turbocharge our planning for this kind of thing, and hopefully have money left over to actually implement some of it. And so that's what I think would make sense, specifically for that 200,000 that you're saying isn't such high priority. I totally recognize the value of the merit connection in terms of redundancy and redundancy generally in engineering thinking. So I'm in favor of that, but the 200,000 I think we could allocate towards a consultant and potentially some project that would actually actualize a component of that plan. So I'm interested in that, and maybe even augmenting the 200,000, depending on what the plan entails. Thank you.
Thank you.
Danny.
Yeah, very similarly, just to be super concrete, I think what would help the 11th quite a bit is, like, if not an exact quote, closer to what the consultants, I'm thinking maybe a townwide connectivity consultant thing maybe is even in this unassigned money potentially. These all seem like worthy goals. Connectivity is very important. We have, unassigned is still pretty big. This may be a huge chunk, but that might be, I would like a price tag more or less on what it would cost to engage consultants in that mapping. But even before we get into what the consultants think the price of what they would map might be.
Andy, in terms of the 200,000 approximately that you've noted here for potential network extension on Rogers Road, is that something that would be connected to existing conduit that we already have?
Correct.
Be extending, thinking about this like as another utility, extending it along the length of Rogers Road. Is that the idea, that it makes it more available to that community?
So we have fiber and conduit out to our fire station 2 on Homestead Road, and we have a gap then to Rogers Road, and then we pick up the whole length of Rogers Road. So this would connect those two.
Gotcha.
It'd be a
I think
very
in my
nice
mind,
thing to have.
Thanks for clarifying that, because in my mind it's sort of, if you remember when we applied that new zoning district to the Rogers Road community on the west side of and Carrboro's jurisdiction, the idea was that would be an area where we want to see affordable housing. We want to see so I'm just thinking about the possibilities of, again, getting this stuff in the ground, even if there's not an immediate use for it, so that when we do see development in that area that's meeting our other goals around affordability, the infrastructure is already there.
Yeah, and for me, the way what I'm weighing is like existing affordable housing versus
Right. That's true. Great
potential.
point. Great. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Barbara?
I have a question. So the consultant that we're talking about, which I think is a good idea, is that in addition to the $500,000 that's been designated as what you just described? Is that in addition to? Is that
Yes,
what we're
that-
talking about?
So we probably
In
need to.
addition to that.
Be in addition to.
Yes.
That's what I
But we
meant.
could drop 200,000 out of the 500,000 and put it toward that.
Yeah, Sammy, what Sammy's recommending is that we, instead of doing the 200,000 for the Rogers Road piece of it, which doesn't have a clear use right now, that we would use that to do a consultant who would advise us about how to be more system-wide
Oh, we're
thinking about it.
splitting
Yeah.
the 500,000. Okay, that was a little confusing.
And I would just like to see prices for all of them before we prioritize Rogers Road versus consultant versus,
Yeah,
that's-
I'm fine with.
Yeah.
I mean, I may well agree with Sammy, I think, if we see the price. I'm not positive at all, but.
Mr. Manager, do you feel like you have information here that you can work with? Okay.
Yes, sir.
We are, yes.
Great. Thanks very much,
Yeah,
Andy.
thank
Yeah,
you.
much obliged. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy, Danny, and Barbara. All right, moving on. So I want to be just conscious of the time here, y'all. It's 9:15. I know that we all have got also some ideas on our own minds about other things we might be interested in seeing here. Who wants to go next? Susan,
I
and
wonder
then
if I could ask a question along that line. So, given the hour at this point, should we be saving some of our wish lists for the one-on-one meetings and then just trying to focus on?
Oh, I am. I have some wish lists still.
So would that be more appropriate just to save those?
My suggestion would be if you go ahead and get those to us, because we can start looking at those and begin to compare that to the rules to see what's feasible, what's not, and we can start thinking about that in advance of those one-on-one meetings. That'd be helpful to staff, at least.
in terms of in terms of hearing from council members tonight, prioritizing what's good to start with hearing from us, given the limited time, right? We don't want to be here all night. We know that some council members have already shared some ideas with you individually by email. You've heard already a few ideas here tonight about, for example, the police department's proposals, some from IT. I guess what I'm trying to avoid, Mr. Manager, unless this is what you want us to do, what I'm trying to avoid is us getting into, let's just go down the line and give us your wish list tonight, right here and right now. Let's get it out. I assume, I mean, we can do that. I just want to be realistic about our patience with doing that. Or is it more effective for us to highlight some categories of things that we're interested in or questions that we have that we aren't clear about in the proposal that's been printed here? What's the kind of feedback you need from us tonight versus what you'd like to hear in the one-on-one meetings? Or
So let me say, since staff is here tonight, are there any items that you want to hear from staff from? It's easier to try to explain these things than to write these long emails and responses back. But considering staff is here tonight, is there anything on your list that you want to hear from staff from tonight? I say let's start there as a priority.
why don't we start with things that people have questions about that staff might be able to answer? Okay? So you've got the proposed spending plan. Staff's done a great work of getting these proposed items on the list. Are there ones that really pop out to you that you had questions? We did that with Chief ATAC. We did that with Andy. Are there others like that? Okay, so we'll do Barbara, then Eleazar, then Susan.
Thank you, Mayor. And so just probably some points of clarification for Recreation Park. That's you now. You know who I'm talking to. Come on up here, Mr. Harrington. How are you?
Welcome, Charles. Charles, I think this might be your first time being before us at a council meeting, so I should just mention, first of all, that Charles Harrington is our new, this is for people listening at home, interim Recreation and Parks Director,
Right.
and has been with the department for a long, long time. So, you know, what's up in that department, and really appreciate you taking on this responsibility for us right now.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Romaine, for mentioning the music festival, especially in light of no meeting. And I'll plug the Poetry Festival as well, October 14th and 15th. So.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Fushi.
Got them heels dug in. Go ahead, Mr. Harrington. Recreation and Parks. And so I think I was first looking at the Baldwin Park renovation for clarification, and also our music festival, which this is the honorarium
Correct.
for 2023 and 2024?
Fiscal year 23-24,
23,
so just one
and-
fiscal year.
And so what after that?
That would be a CTDA item typically. I can let Art correct me if I'm wrong, but typically that would be a request through Tourism
that's-
Development Authority.
Okay.
So this would help offset the budgetary pressure on them.
Until that physical year.
Right.
Okay, when you talk about the Baldwin Park renovation, what kinds of things are going to happen over there?
Primarily.
We also have maintenance and repair at the top. I assume that's across all parks.
Correct. So
Okay.
with Baldwin Park, that's primarily the replacement of the playground structure. It's nearing the end of its life, so typically we get around 8 to 10 years. Some newer structures, we may see 15 to 20-year warranties on them, but primarily we're looking at replacement of playgrounds. In conjunction with that other piece, that $100,000, those are things identified through the One Orange racial equity lens that we've been doing with facility assessments. So you're talking about things like picnic tables, bench replacements, replacement of signage, and those types of things.
So basically, just kind of upgrading, bringing it
Correct.
up, bringing it up to
Correct.
speed with our other parks. Those were the two questions that I had for Recreation and Parks. I think that was all.
Great, thanks, Barbara. This is actually good. So maybe what we'll do is if people have questions, so anybody have questions for Recreation and Parks, we'll go. So I already had Eleazar and Susan on the list, and I'll add Randy. So Eleazar, go ahead.
So, sorry if this is just a weird question, but what's a horseshoe pit?
Okay. Are you
Are you from Texas?
familiar with cornhole at all? Where the
Yeah,
throwing the
that's the thing that you throw when it hits the hole.
predecessor to cornhole. Yeah. You can imagine horseshoes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, very similar. I mean, pits at each end. That's something it's not solely unique to Carrboro, but it's relatively rare amongst communities. It's a more rural game, going back to Carrboro's rural roots. With the horseshoe pits, those were constructed in the 1980s, so they're showing a lot of age. There's a lot that we need done out there to upgrade those pits in terms of regrading, just total replacement of that facility. And the reason it's important and we kept it in here is we do bring in people from outside of the community for tournaments 4 to 5 times per year. It's also one, probably as a percentage-wise, we get a little bit more diversity, in comparison with other programs. So, so we bring in members of different communities that come in, plus some local residents, and also from Durham area that come in. So that's something that would allow us to maintain our sanctioning. There's actually a North Carolina Horseshoe Pitchers Association that provides like sanctioning for courts, and that would help bring those up to par.
So where are these?
Oh
my gosh!
Are you familiar with
the horseshoe lobby over here?
Are you familiar with the
Where are these?
picnic shelter at Anderson Park?
Yeah.
It's adjacent.
Okay.
We're gonna play.
See now,
now we
wait.
need-
So
That's right.
now I'm gonna
The
go
next
look at
work
this because I'm
session of the
curious.
Go take a look.
Okay. Well, yeah, that was. Sorry for the dumb question.
That's a good question.
Oh, no, great question. Great
Right,
question.
Susan, you're up next. Just on again, we're just on Recreation and Parks right now.
Oh, just on Recreation and Parks. So the Charles, good evening. Thank you for being here. I know that the local artists, art organizations, very, very hard hit by the pandemic. And I'm pretty sure in the community survey that was sort of lifted up a little bit about trying to find stipends for local artists, murals, sculpture, other projects to do downtown that would also kind of beautify our downtown a little bit more too in the process. Was this considered at all in terms of building this into the budget, or? Just
I'm not sure what the
curious.
survey responses. We'd have to go back and review some of those. But to give council perspective, based on the most recent murals, you're looking at cost anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 probably per mural. Obviously, that can vary greatly depending on the size and scope of what's being installed. But if that provides some perspective for consideration.
That pretty much probably shoots my next idea then. So I have had this ever since seeing The Cage in Durham. I have had this dream of having a basketball court in our downtown. It would be obviously covered, but no walls. I think it would be really vibrant to our downtown. And also, you mentioned about the diversity. I think it would certainly be adding to the diversity in terms of the rec programs. So, any thought about, has there ever been consideration of this idea, and any idea in terms of the pricing of this idea?
So it's actually the first time, to my knowledge, that's come up. I mean, certainly there's been a need for a indoor gym in the community, and I think as part of the comp plan, we've got a feasibility study, as part of that calendar to conduct one for a community center, possibly including a gymnasium if that's identified, but something along the lines of the cage, and especially in the downtown area. I guess one challenge we would consider is identification and acquisition of land that may need to be considered. In terms of cost, being familiar with the cage, we did look at something I think about a year ago in regards to like a structure that would go over the basketball courts at Anderson Park. So to give you a ballpark, just the superstructure without any type of lighting or anything along those lines is around $300,000.
Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm.
That's probably the closest approximation I could provide right now in terms of a cost.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So going back to the artist stipends in terms of murals or whatever, that would still be something that we could keep alive as a possibility. Okay. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Susan. And Randy, you are next.
Yeah, just on Rexon Park. Hi, Charles. How
Hey,
you
Randy.
doing? It's
Good,
so
how are you?
good to see you in person. This is a small question. It may, looking at the revenue replacement, several folks have asked about, and Danny, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump ahead into something we had talked about, but had asked about a spray pad at Anderson. And there's great community interest. It was wanted at Martin Luther King Park, was sidestepped. Is this something that could potentially, this could be for anybody in Carrboro, and there's huge interest, especially given the heat index during the summer, to have something. We don't have a pool, but to have a spray park at Anderson. And so I'm just bringing that forth because folks have, all summer long, they were asking, is this something that we can look toward? Pardon?
No, I was talking.
And of course, unlike the horseshoe pit, we all know what a spray park is, and we all would love to get out there. Seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Charles, have y'all ever looked into this splash pad issue at all? Or?
Splash pad.
Yeah, we've done some preliminary cost analysis. I guess in regards to an installation, roughly, I think 5,000 square feet is what we've looked at. 225,000 or so. At Anderson Park specifically, without an OWASA connection, we would have to consider that cost, or look at a well option, which would add probably an additional, I think we estimated $50,000. If we did go with a well option, typically it's recommended we would need some type of staffing to monitor the water quality, and that's typically done hourly. Some of the council members may be familiar with other communities, I think in Kansas, Texas, that have had some issues with bacteria, brain-eating amoebas, the scary things you hear. So that water quality testing is important, which ideally you would be on an OWASA line that is chlorinated.
Right.
So in that regard, that adds another piece. In addition to the well and the installation of the pad, you need a chlorination system added to that as well.
Well, I know that folks in the community would really like to see this explored seriously, and as community looks over this, they certainly would love to see something like that as part of something definitive in the rec and parks, because it's something that can be used by all the folks in the community. So thank you for considering, and that was Park.
That's your Rec and Parks. Okay, great.
Charles,
Thanks.
isn't Chapel Hill doing a splash park?
They recently concluded a feasibility study in terms of what has been identified and what their timeline is for that. I'm not sure. I do believe it is included in their ARPA funding. And we also looked at that. It may, help guide us in terms of a site identification in the long term. But I've not seen any announcement on whether or not they're proceeding with that and where that may be located.
Barbara?
Yeah, I have a question about the splash pad. So you mentioned a staff member. So somebody would have to be there like all the time, or what would that look
Not
like?
sure if
And
they would-
that's just for the water, to
Right.
monitor water.
Right. Not sure if they would physically need to be there all the time, but definitely on an hourly basis
Okay.
check water quality. That's the recommendation that we've seen.
And that's if you use a well, sorry.
Right.
That's just for using a well.
Right.
That's a good clarification.
Little amoebas.
Does that answer your question, Barbara?
Yeah, I don't know how interested I am in the splash pad. That is a summertime thing mainly. What
Correct.
is, how would it run year to year? I'm just thinking about usage, and like it doesn't have year-round usage. I mean,
Correct. Yeah, it's typically
used a
during the
certain
summer hours,
portion
and
of the
most are
year.
shut down, to prevent, freezing and bursting of pipes and those types of things.
May through September.
Right, correct.
I mean, if the majority wants it, fine. This is my opinion, so you don't have to worry about convincing me.
So we're throwing out our wish list, so that's what we're here to do for
Yeah,
sure.
so it's fine. Yeah, so it would open when? Normally, 2
Typically,
or 3
as
months?
Brandy said, most are that May through September timeframe. Mid-September usually is when most shut
5
down.
months.
It's basically your same pool season that you may see for outdoor pools in the community.
Climate change will expand that.
Like year round. Year round.
North Carolina weather in general, we may.
It's also a pretty big price tag too, so, yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Charles, very much. This was helpful.
Absolutely.
Horseshoes, we're gonna play horseshoes.
Can I just add,
Eliezer
not
was
for
hustling us
Charles,
all.
but
Go ahead,
one
Sam.
idea combining both the splash pad and the basketball court is Beaver Street. Like,
There you go.
that would be, like, talk about liveliness, you know?
Super live. There you go.
We are definitely on our wish lists here now.
It's coming together.
Okay, I'm liking this idea of if there are maybe categories of things so that we don't have to have staff coming up and back and forth. So are there other categories that we'd like to hear about, Barbara?
I thought I saw John Hartman Brown.
So economic development.
Economic development.
John, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
You got all the answers to anybody worried about John.
Thank you, Barbara. I was going to ask.
You're welcome.
What questions do you have for John, Barbara?
Hello, John.
Hello.
So I think my question, so the small business grants, that is what we've done already. Is that correct?
Correct,
That's
yes.
what we have that line item there.
Yep.
And the disparity study that I've heard Mr. White talk about, could you kind of guide me, with that, either you or Mr. White, about the study, what you're looking for? There's some legal implications there. So just kind of briefly, anybody, whoever it is, it may not be you, maybe Mr. White, or
So some more information about the disparity study.
or
Mr.
if you don't want to,
That's fine.
Oh, okay.
So what the disparity study would do, we have to have a legal basis to have a minority and women-owned business program, if you will. Council would have to adopt that type of program to really focus on procurement activities that focus on our historical unutilized businesses. And so we would have to have this disparity study as a legal basis to establish that type of program. And that will allow us to focus on our procurement activity in that area.
I don't know. I've just always been like somewhat confused by that because we could just randomly just decide to use them, right? Is there a problem with that? I don't. You know what I'm trying.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, yes, I guess we could randomly use them, but we want to be intentional is the goal. That's what this will allow us to be intentional in what we do in terms of trying to spread economic activity among our unutilized businesses. And we have to have a legal basis to do that.
The legal basis part. Nick, do you have anything, or that was pretty much it?
No, I agree with this.
Okay. And John probably knows about the minority business assistance and just a little bit more about what you hope that will bring for $500,000.
Yeah, sure. what we're looking at is a variety of different programming that would go with that, primarily looking at technical assistance in the form of business training and small business training for BIPOC businesses. For example, we're actually working right now or helping to cobble together a entrepreneurship training program with El Centro, so we could have a all Spanish training class, Spanish-speaking training class as well. So we just got finished with our partnership with Durham Tech this past spring, and where we did some business training as well. So programs like that. I'm also looking at doing some one-on-one programming opportunities. So where we would have the opportunity for a business to, a BIPOC business to say, hey, I'd like to have some one-on-one coaching or training. And so we can work with a consultant to provide that training as well.
And so I know the money is, that's $500,000. It's got to be used by a certain period of time. I thought at one time we were talking about maybe an actual physical space or something. That was a conversation, but I don't know if that, because what happens when the money runs out, it becomes the thing.
Yeah, there's a pretty high operational expense with that, but that's something that we could certainly look at as well.
Thank you, John. Mr. White.
Thank you, Barbara. Just to follow up on Barbara's question, could you, and maybe what the manager shared about the diversity disparities study, the link, if there is one, between the disparity study and the requirement to have this legal basis for a minority and women-owned business enterprise programs, and what you're proposing to do with this, what you're calling minority business assistance, which is $500,000, which is great. I love that we're, sort of earmarking those funds. Is there a relationship between those two activities as well? In other words, are there things you're hoping to do through this minority business assistance program that would need to be informed by the results of the disparity study, or are there things you can be doing already, like these training programs that don't have to wait?
Yeah, there's certainly some things that we can do already, but I think that to Mr. White's point, the disparity study is going to be the big kind of help us see our blind spots. And so that's where we really want to focus so that we can be intentional about where we're spending the funds.
And that's Mr. Manager.
And there'll be a lag as well, because we have to go through an RFP process to get to someone to do the study, that to do the study. So that's going to come a little later. So yeah, there are things we've been doing now to help our existing businesses.
And then as part of that $500,000, is there also some, you anticipate using some of that as like grant funding, similar to what we did with the small business grants, or is this a totally different?
Right now, I'm not anticipating doing any other kinds of grants. We'd focus on technical assistance.
Okay.
It could result in other benefits other than just technical, but memberships to different things. I know we've done CBA memberships before, so it could be something like that potentially. But yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay. So for John, Randy, I had you next on the list. Did you have questions for John and anyone else? Susan and Eleazar? Go ahead, Randy.
Okay, John, so I'm going to ask about, and I don't know, I think this could fall into the minority business assistance, sort of. I'm going to ask about Old 86 and the potential to, work into a workforce training, reskilled, or plunging deeper into entrepreneurial enterprise development with, for example, and this is just an example, to set up a kitchen prep facility for our mobile businesses or our pop-up businesses. Is that the kind of program that is feasible?
I would say possibly. I think the bigger question comes back to some of the requirements in what we can spend the funds on. So we would need to vet that a little. I think, in my opinion, we would need to vet that a little more to make sure that, yeah.
If you would, because it undergirds so many different kinds of businesses. And it would give us an opportunity to start to develop the footprint, to have the workforce guilds, et cetera, and it works with community groups such as Cell and all the mobile folks who are local. So that would have been one of my one-on-one questions. So look into that and share that information back to the 11th. That would be great.
Sure.
Thanks, Randy. Next is Susan and then Eleazar.
Hey, John. Just one question this evening. So with the labor shortage, I know that there's a lot of business owners, especially restaurant owners, who have said that it's been really, really challenging to find temporary workers. So an example will be that you're in a restaurant owner and you get a big catering order, and that's very profitable opportunity, but you just can't round up employees to help with the catering order. Or another example will be an employer who all of a sudden one of their workers has COVID and is out for a week, and they're looking for somebody just to fill that week's time. So it sort of begs the question about apprenticeships, paid apprenticeships, possibly with high school students that could come in and help, make the order with the burritos or wait tables or what have you with some of the restaurants. So I wanted to, I'm not sure if that is already included anywhere here, but if not, I wanted to just sort of throw that out as a possibility for having a budget set aside for that. And I think it would also be just really great apprenticeship opportunities for high school students, and as you are doing and so much of your work trying to, especially identify students of color that could be a part of the apprenticeship programs.
Sure.
Like the summer academy?
That's exactly what I was thinking, but rather than just the summer, it would be year-round and meeting really specific needs of businesses who are without workers when they need them the most.
Thank you, Susan. Eleazar?
Hi, John.
Hey.
So just one quick question. I'm looking at the minority business assistance, but you've said BIPOC while you're up there. I just want to make sure that I have the right terminology here. We're talking about either BIPOC or just in general this minority concept, right?
You too.
Yeah, I mean, it would include, I think, any minority defined business. So, but that's just more of that technical language that's used by, especially by like the federal government and things like that, or the government program.
Mr. White, I saw that.
You hit on it, yes.
Okay.
Federal definition.
Gotcha. So that would include like women-owned, LGBTQ-owned, so on and so forth. Not just people of color owned.
There are specific categories under the federal statutes. They don't even know what those are, but there are specific ones that the federal government defines as being minority and women-owned.
Gotcha. And can we get a little bit more? Can I get a little bit more information of what that is? Because I just want to understand it. Because I'm very much in favor of, if at all possible, kind of limiting some assistance to like BIPOC, businesses. But definitely open to following federal law on this. Don't want to break that.
We're very open to federal law. Thank you,
A
Eleazar.
little bit.
It is a good question. I'm curious now to know what those categories are too.
I love it.
Thanks, Eleazar. Very good question. All right. Any other questions for John and his category on the sheet? Looks like you're off the hook, John.
All right.
Thanks very much. Appreciate your responses. Okay. Got a lot of other good stuff on the list here that I really appreciate the work staff has done to flesh this out for us. I'm sure you'll hear more in some of the one-on-ones. Is there other questions or wish list items people wanted to share this evening?
I'll be emailing particular things tomorrow to all of us that mostly are in correspondence that already exists, ideas you've already served. Just I want to do it in writing.
Danny's going to follow up a little bit offline here. Barbara and then Eleazar. And then Randy, sorry.
Housing and community service.
Okay, so who's here for Housing and Community Services, Mr.
And Marie is here.
And Marie, welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Anne Marie.
Evening, everyone.
Hey, you're in your new role.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Probably just clarification for me, nothing really. So human services at $503,500. And so that recommendation is for what? Because when I think human services, I think about our human services process and that pot of money, which is around 275 or so, something like that. So is this kind of funneled into that somehow, or is it going in another direction for human services?
I think the category for human services is just speaking to the nonprofits, but it would be separate from our human services program because the proposals that we get need to meet the ARPA requirements.
Oh, it's a different channel, totally different channel. Okay, so they would have to fill out applications related to the ARPA money. I see Mr. White nodding his head. Home energy efficiency renovations, I know what that is. The emergency housing assistance. The OWASA water bill debt is debt that was incurred during the pandemic by OWASA, and they're asking us to share in that. Is that right?
Is it people paying their bills?
That was my question.
Is it old debt?
These are delinquent accounts in
Delinquent
Carrboro.
accounts.
Yes,
Okay.
for Carrboro residents.
Okay.
During the
And so
pandemic, right.
They're doing the same in Chapel Hill.
That's right.
Yes,
Yes.
they are.
So that's what I thought it was.
Gotcha.
This is a specific request from OWASA.
Okay.
This came from OWASA.
Okay. And when you talk about affordable housing units, I see $1 million. And that's just sitting, waiting, I presume. Well, it can't wait too long because we have to spend by.
It can't wait too long.
Somebody will use
could
it.
be used for land purchase. It could be used for creating units immediately if there's an opportunity.
So it's just, okay, so the same uses are affordable housing special revenue. But just it's ARPA money, so we have to account for it in that way.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks, Anne Marie. That's all I needed.
That's it.
Barbara asked all my questions. So.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Barbara. Next I have Eleazar and then Randy.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for so this is I think we touched on this, but I just want to make sure. The OWASA water bill, that's like for delinquent accounts. And is that a number that's going to increase or decrease, or is stagnant, right? Because I'm thinking you pay bills every month, or at least I have to pay water every month, and if we're expecting more delinquent accounts, is this amount accounting for that or not, or are we able to account for that in the as we look
It's
at
limited to the pandemic period, and now they are billing as normal.
Gotcha. So it's only
the forgiveness is over. That period has passed and it's time for repayment. But there are going to be some households who just simply cannot pay what they owe, and so this is to make up for that lack there for OWASA.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. This is my clarifying question on that one.
Thanks, Eleazar. Randy.
Okay, and Marie, I don't know that if you can't answer this, that's okay. I just need to know if we could kind of explore it, and that is that from what I've read in the document, ARPA and the CSL FRF, that if we wanted to pursue the question of water quality in terms of exposure to PFAS and PFOA, we could actually, in fact, and this is, I think this is according to the National League of Cities, we could work with OWASA and give monies directly to OWASA to assist with a filtration system. Has there been any conversation about doing that to ensure current and future water quality from the PFAS, PFOA?
Not that I'm aware of through our department.
Is that something we can look at? I mean, I don't.
Absolutely.
As you see,
Mhm.
Owasso on its own wouldn't be getting that money. But the municipalities and of course the county can get the money. And this is of course long-term. And it's a very, I mean, to have a full filtration system for Owasso would be expensive on their own. So and I know that they've earmarked water quality because I don't know what, they're working with the EPA Clean Water Act, so.
Definitely look into that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Sammy, and then back to Susan.
Just a quick three questions. One is, given that the Human Services is separate from the Human Services Advisory Board, to this policy guidance question, application review of those grant requests would happen. That's to be determined still.
It's to be determined.
So for us as a council to
You all to discuss, yes.
to think of. So
That's a great question, Sammy. Thanks for raising that. So Barbara reminded us that we do have our existing annual allocation of, $275 or whatever it is for the Human Services Advisory Commission, who helps advise us on how to use those dollars, responding to community needs. This money has to go through a different process just because it needs to meet all of our, it needs to
Correct.
comply
It's
with the
different.
federal requirements. But do we want our kind of approval of those grants to be at the similar level of input by the council? Or do we want to ask, for example, our Human Services Advisory Commission to do that process? Or do we want some other kind of review process for that money? Just posing the question.
I mean, for me, my first reaction is let's see what Human Services says in response to the question, and if they say yes, then that would be
Remember,
great.
Human Services normally only meets 2 or 3 times during the first part of the year. So this would be
Typically.
asking them to come back and sort of take on an additional responsibility.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, it would.
like other advisory boards meet more often. Maybe they could do it.
It's a question for us to consider is how do we want that to look? Do we want this to go through a similar kind of process as our usual human services amount allocation goes through, or do we want some other process?
I mean, that's what they do. They have experience in doing that. I mean, is it a matter of asking them or
I think it's just a matter of being clear that it would require
more time?
more than what they usually do.
Correct.
So we don't have to answer this question tonight, but it's just something for us to be considering as we move forward about how we want to see that happen.
Yeah, I think we should ask them and then just be very clear about the time and what it's going to entail and all that, and just see how they chew on that.
It reminds me a little bit of the granting of the when we had the small business grants with 2 rounds, and we ended up using that same group because they had done such a great job, and I think our advisory board does a really good job on the outside agency grants.
I think the other reason it makes sense is because they already know a lot of these
That's
same
right.
organizations, and the
Right.
context of the asks are.
I think it's a good idea. I guess my question is more that's the appropriate level of review by council, which I agree with. I think we don't want to be going through a grant application. And
My other question was LMI, Home Energy Efficiency Renovation. Sorry, what is LMI?
Low to moderate income.
Okay, thank you. And so details about that, is that part of our work with our collaborative?
Yes, so it's repairs and weatherization.
It's augmenting their energy
Augmenting that
efficiency on that.
work.
My understanding is there's also money that the state is augmenting the weatherization assistance program with. So for me, I feel like to whatever degree we can work on campaign to raise awareness and really leverage use of those state and federal monies and our local monies to really maximize it. Again, like this goal of weatherizing every low-income home in town first. And then a question, more general question in terms of the degree to which the stormwater utilities had input on allocation of these funds. Mr. Manager, I know that the Stormwater Utility Advisory or Commission is interested and has raised the question about these funds and the infrastructure funds, and they want to be included in the process. And I know these specific funds very clearly speak to stormwater as an opportunity for use. So I just want to put that out there. If we could provide this information to the stormwater utility for their next meeting so that they can, if they have any ideas for how to potentially allocate some of these funds, that the council will have the benefit of their input too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Mr. Manager, can you clarify, I assume the stormwater utility staff were part of work group discussions at some point?
Yes, Randy was involved, yes.
Thank you. Susan was next, but she had to step out briefly, so Eleazar, you're next.
So my question was more around manufactured homes when we're looking at housing community. I know that we, and I'm not too familiar where the manufactured county home plan is. I forget what the actual title of that plan looks like, but is there a way to use some of these funds to specifically put aside for manufactured homes in Carrboro, whether that's assisting either fixing or whatever for the actual units themselves, or working with owners to ensure that some of these manufactured home neighborhoods are adequate for the needs of the community, right? Thinking of repairs around the roads and water management and all that fun stuff.
There could be a carve out. The problem that we run into though in terms of like repairing units is if it's owned by a landlord, then we can't use our money to do that. It's only if it's owner occupied.
Gotcha.
So and within Carrboro, all of them are owned by landlords.
I see.
So it's a little bit difficult. We have been looking at seeing what we could do to preserve any mobile home parks that might be coming up for sale, but so far there isn't anything that we're aware of. We were working with one particular park and a lot of nonprofits, but he has decided to continue to operate the park for a little while longer. So,
Gotcha.
so right now we're pretty stable in terms of our parks.
Gotcha. And then, I get we can't do any repairs on homes owned by the landlord. And then I assume like kind of repairs around or just putting in water management systems or some kind of repairs of like roads and stuff like that in these neighborhoods. That's also off the table because it's owned by the landlord.
I guess that would fall under infrastructure and public works more so, I would imagine. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Manager. I'm not sure that would be a housing function at this point.
Makes sense.
But, the plan exists, and I think that some carve-out funds could be available to figure out a way to begin to implement this plan a little bit more proactively in terms of engaging the neighborhoods themselves.
Anne Marie, by this plan, you're referring to the mobile home strategy that we reviewed?
Yes, the manufactured home strategy that was adopted.
Mr. Manager, can you forward that over to me, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Eleazar. Right, Susan, you had a question for Anne Marie.
Yeah, I just had a quick question for clarification. The emergency housing assistance. So right now, the town's contribution to that is through the CDBG grant.
Correct.
That's running out. And then the county will continue to fund that assistance through their ARPA funds?
Correct.
And when does our $500,000 then kick in?
It would probably kick in for Carrboro residents immediately. So I think that the county would fund the gap to cover Carrboro, but once we had our own funds, and they would continue to serve the folks that are in the county.
I got you. So as soon as we have ours, they pull out and they just focus on county residents.
That's how it's been working.
I got you. Okay. Thank you. That makes sense. Appreciate it.
Susan. Sammy.
So just following up on that question, is there some kind of formula by which, because people in Carrboro pay taxes too and receive services from the county too, that we're making sure that the share is equitable in terms of how the county is contributing to, for example, that specific line item, emergency housing, like,
I don't think we've used any particular formula. It's really been, it's really been in response to the pandemic, and we've kind of been making it up as we go along a little bit. We are looking towards long-term sustainability of the program, so that is something that we could consider. But right now, we're still trying to wrap up CDBG and trying to think of how to use these ARPA dollars towards the great need for emergency
What
housing.
comes to mind immediately is like,
Yeah.
it's kind of arbitrary that we set aside 500,000. If we had done less, would they have been
Right,
willing to
but
find
being
that
willing to
money?
pay more.
Question, yeah, your question, Sammy, is very timely and a good one. And
Yeah.
because we are about to kind of kick off a conversation at the manager level with all of the jurisdictions around these sort of longer-term housing strategies and how to effectively fund, for example, emergency rental assistance and other programs in partnership with the county in a way that addresses the concern you're raising about the fact that, well, Carrboro residents are also county residents, right?
Right.
Those conversations are going to be kicking off soon.
And
And so hope to have more to report about that.
the housing directors are going to meet in a couple of weeks to talk about long-term EHA plans, and I'll definitely bring that to the table.
Yeah, use that as an example, like,
Absolutely.
how do we make sure we're all pulling our weight here? Thank you.
Right. Anne Marie, thanks so much for your work, as
Okay.
usual.
Thank you all.
I know that's a big pot of money that I know we're all excited about getting out the door as soon as we can, so appreciate it. Okay, are there other categories on the list here that folks would like to ask staff questions about while we have them here?
Who's out there?
I would hate for
up here
Julie and
yet?
Kat to get off.
Yeah. See a few people hiding.
I don't have anybody.
I have nothing else.
I have a process.
Process question? Randy, go ahead.
Okay, so what is the process by which we sign up for the individual or small group meetings between now and October 11th?
Good question. Mr. Manager.
We'll reach out and schedule these. I'll work on that.
I'm guessing that most of us are interested in some meeting of some kind, whether it's individually or small group, so
Okay.
it'll be a good opportunity for all of us.
We'll be in contact. Get those scheduled.
Tammy?
Just one
More
question,
process
Mr.
question?
Manager. I guess this general administration line item, community engagement, is that, could you just share a little bit about what that entails?
Yes.
Oh, is that Catherine?
Yes, you come
Is
forward.
it, is it,
Almost made it out.
all right.
Come on, Miss Lazar.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a sense of how you see each of that.
Hi, good evening. Yes, that line item is actually for the purchase of some new digital signage. And you may have noticed that we have new town information centers appearing in our local parks, thanks to Public Works. But this line item is actually to purchase larger, like LED outdoor digital signage that we could install potentially at our shopping centers in town.
Okay.
So just kind of expanding this communication network of signage.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. Right. Susan, did you have a question on
It's
process?
it's not a process. It's a question about one new category. That would be a really quick question.
Nice. Can I go
Yes.
first?
Mm-hmm.
Well, had your turn. I'm going to do mine now, and I'm going to call up Public Works.
That's what he thought he was gonna get out. That's the snipes. Almost made it.
And just so we know, also, Trish, I'm going to have a question for planning as well. They're easy ones, I promise. Welcome. It's good to see you here. Thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate the list you've shared with us on Public Works, which is primarily replacing that fuel tank that is kind of a desperate situation at this point. So looking forward to getting that done. A couple of things that came to mind for me were in trying to shoehorn these into the ARPA categories of eligible expenses. But I'm thinking about, for example, the Francis Shetley Bikeway, which has had some patchwork needed, as you know, and probably needs to be resurfaced. And it strikes me as a great opportunity to improve infrastructure on a pathway that a lot of people use to get outside and be healthy and active, and also to get from one place to another. We thought about opportunities for resurfacing the Francis Shetley Bikeway, and likewise, the Libba Cotton Bikeway, which also needs some work.
Yes, that's a great opportunity right now for us to look at both bikeways
We are entering, and we have entered into a contract to do a pavement condition survey, not only for our roads, and but this is added to the bikeways that we do maintain, the Libicotton and Francis Shelley. We can look at that and see if we can use those funds to do some resurfacing of those bike paths. But our initial goal is to get the pavement condition surveys back to be able to focus our resources on which particular paths need the repairs.
Right, so that'll help you set priorities.
Correct.
When, do you know what your timeline is on getting the results of that survey done?
We're hoping to get those by the end of the year. The survey has been completed. It is, the field data has been collected. They are now doing the post report and mapping.
So pretty soon, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's me throwing in my 2 cents about I'd love to see some resurfacing of those paths, but I also understand that it's within this process of setting priorities, because I know there are other needs. Thank you for that.
Yes, thanks.
Anything else for Public Works before we let, go ahead.
Actually, this will be my question. I thought was for another category, but I think it would fall under Public Works, and it's all setting priorities. So there's been some interest in a public bathroom and public water fountains downtown. I know it's not everybody would support this, so I think it would be a conversation with council if we wanted to move in this direction. But I'm curious if, to what extent have community members asked you about having a 24/7 centrally located public bathroom downtown, and if you think this would be covered by ARPA funding?
Yeah, I know with the new 203 building that we do have a ability to have a 24/7 bathroom at that location. I haven't been specifically asked about other areas around town. I have, again, it kind of goes to the ability to acquire land and where would be the best use of the property or the facility downtown. Getting a consultant or some type of engineering firm to look at that and dealing with OWASA to get the hookup for that.
That's really helpful. So the bathroom in the 203 will be open 24/7?
I believe that's my understanding.
Well, the idea, it's in the approved schematic final design of the building includes an externally available bathroom. And I think in terms of its availability, the staff will have to come up with a process for keep managing that and maintaining it and keeping it safe and clean and all of those things. But we, from the very beginning of the 203 project, we're talking about that being an opportunity to have a publicly available restroom.
I know there's a shower in the 203 as well, and I believe that's just for staff.
Yeah.
Is there has there been discussion about opening that up to the public as well?
That'll be something, might look at Trish, but that was something we can look at.
Building, so.
Yeah, inside the building. Okay, this is really helpful though. That helps a lot.
Good question. An important one because, we've been talking with the Partnership to End Homelessness for years about having bathroom availability. Sammy?
Yeah, and to that point, I would be interested in us having it available for the public use, the shower. So if there's input from the council, there's one person, 2 people at least, who are interested.
Maybe some more information about that opportunity.
Right.
The other thing, this is that battles your department and Rex and Park is recycling bins in the parks. Like MLK doesn't have them, and I think that we at one point got some for our downtown, but maybe we could look into the parks also having them. Events happen at that little kiosk, and people are just putting it all in the trash, and I think there's an opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And then my last question is for Trish from Planning.
Anything on the page?
It's really me just beating the same old drum, I think, Trish, so none of this will come as a surprise to you. I'll just beat the drum again.
Oh, boy.
We in 2020 adopted the updated bike plan.
Yes.
And there are 10 projects identified as priority projects in that plan, 5 in particular as like top priority, I guess, of those 10. So I just want to throw in my pitch for finding some way, if it makes sense, to use some of this money to get some movement on one or more of those projects. I know that we've made a little bit of we made some movement on Jones Ferry Road. We've got design underway for Shelton Street. But if there's any possibility of using these funds to just get us closer to getting some of those projects on the ground, I'd like to use the opportunity.
Yeah, we're working on North Greensboro as well. We have a.
That's right.
Working towards having a design in hand, so when the resurfacing happens in 2024, hopefully we'll have separated bike lanes and other things there. So, okay, we definitely can
We just
take
want to look for
take a
opportunities in the
second-
bike plans. It's an adopted plan. We know what we need.
Yeah.
Just need to make it happen.
Okay, we'll take a look.
And likewise, the Safe Routes to School plan needs to be de-dusted, and there's a priority. There are a couple priorities in that plan too. And one of them's at the end of Pleasant Street. I think that's one of the top priorities, that low connection with Estes Apartments. I know the challenge there has been with management, but it's been so long since we've tried to address that maybe there's a change in perspective from the management there. But if you could include that plan too in your request.
Thanks for mentioning that, Sammy. You'll be glad to know that the Transportation Advisory Board last week had some guests who were applicants for what will become our new Safe Routes to School implementation subcommittee of the TAB. And so hopefully and there was a lot of discussion among TAB members last week about this being an opportunity to, as you said, dust off that plan.
Yeah, and let the staff person know I'm interested in being in the loop on that. I'd love to attend some of those meetings.
Sure. Yeah, I think it remains to be seen how they're going to schedule out those subcommittee meetings and stuff. But yeah, I'll keep you in.
Okay, we'll take another look.
Thank
and
you
we'll
very
see
much,
if we
Trish.
can find any that work for the funding criteria.
Thank you.
So, you
Appreciate
bet.
it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to thank staff again, all the department heads and leadership for being here tonight. It's rare to have you all in one room like this, so it's fun to share our ideas with you and respond to what you've proposed. I just want to share a couple of thoughts too about, because we've heard a lot of great ideas tonight, and I think in my mind what's important is that you stay within the guidelines of the federal regulations, obviously. That we've heard a couple of the ideas from council members tonight that really involve, I think, potential opportunities for collaboration. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel on certain things, right, that we actually use this funds as opportunities to expand capacity of existing programs rather than trying to do our own thing just because we want to do it. You've heard a couple of notes from folks about where we want somewhat higher levels of council review and where we don't need as high a level of review, or we're happy to use, for example, the Human Services Advisory Commission to help out with the human services allocation. And then finally, I just want to make a pitch for, and this is sort of going along with my comment to Trish about existing plans. We have existing plans like the bike plan that, we know what the priorities are. And if there are opportunities to use these funds to advance those plans and get some more things done, it seems like a good time to do it. All right, so procedure-wise, next is, you've heard a lot of information from us, Mr. Manager. I know your staff has been taking notes. You're going to be getting back to us about opportunities to sit down with you one-on-one and with Arch or as small groups to talk through more of the thinking we've been doing. We will have this on our agenda tentatively again for October 11th for further discussion, possible adoption, but certainly further discussion. What am I leaving out about process? Oh, I wanted to mention something actually Braxton Fouché mentioned earlier on. Just as much information about the proposed plan that we can get out on the website as early as we can get it out there, I think would be better so that people have something to chew on and think about. I know a lot of input went into this proposed plan from interviews with local nonprofits, community members, and so on, but it's always good to have people think something for people to respond to. Eleazar.
Just on that note, Mr. Manager, definitely, like the mayor said, we would want to get this out as sooner the better. But I would also encourage you and your staff to reach out to some of the organizations in the area who cater to folks who don't have English as a primary language, to possibly doing some kind of either virtual or some kind of informative session in other languages. I don't expect this to be fully translated and put on the website in multiple languages, although that'd be great. But definitely have conversations where even if it's just a recorded session that gets sent out in multiple languages, we can also get that input or that information out there for folks.
If I remember correctly, some of those nonprofit agency interviews were with groups that are doing direct service for communities who speak languages other than English.
Yep.
So I think that's been a good input for the process as well. So maybe just even following up, Mr. Manager, with the organizations you've already spoken to, right? And saying, hey, here's what came of your input.
Let's present what we have. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eleazar. All right, any further guidance for the manager on this topic?
Are we answering these tonight, or have we? I know we've kind of done some of them.
Yeah, I think it was kind of like category by category, right? It's a different answer for depending on what we're talking about.
I don't think we've really addressed.
Right, that's the
fixed
main
date
one.
for applicants.
One
So
and
these will be
three.
like if there's money that is going to be allocated through an application process. Do we want to have one date for all the applications, or do we want to have a rolling submission? Is that kind of what you're getting at there, Arch?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what makes sense to, I guess, we're not going to be the ones implementing the application process. So I'm trying to think about, for example, the human services one, Barbara. If we're going to potentially ask the Human Services Advisory Commission to be responsible for reviewing and recommending in that $500,000 bucket. I don't know. I think their process is they want all the
I
applications.
just
in
feel
one
like a
time.
fixed date. It just makes sense, because you know what's coming in when, and give folks adequate time to.
Streamlines things for people, for staff too.
Yeah, I think the fixed date. I'm on the fixed.
I think at the same time, though, like with affordable housing, that's a huge number, $1 million. We might want that to be rolling in case we're going to get 4 really good proposals.
See, that goes. What somebody just said about it would just be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, do we have room to firm this up on the 11th as we? Great.
Think about
And I
it.
wonder, like, that's a good example that Danny raised about the affordable housing money, right? So that $1 million bucket, for example, our Affordable Housing Advisory Commission uses a rolling, like, is it quarterly or 3 times a year? They do reviews 3 times a year, Anne-Marie is saying. So maybe it just maps onto that existing process rather than coming up with a brand new process. Eleazar.
Just so I'm understanding correctly, we're leaning towards having the staff let us know on a 11th per category what makes sense as round. Because I'm okay with for example, for anything for human resources, just throwing out a date here, by the end of November. But for affordable housing, we'll have rolling. Is that what we're asking staff
Yeah,
to
so
do?
I think there's an interest in, I think Barbara said, seems like it makes sense to have fixed dates, generally speaking. But for some of them, there might be an existing process to use where it makes sense to just use the existing process.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah. I just wanted to understand it.
I don't want to box staff in if it makes sense for them to use a different thing.
Well, there are advantages and disadvantages to both and stuff, and we're probably looking at a combination of the two. And until we firm up the activities a little bit more, I'm not sure what that combination would be right now.
Yeah. We gave you a lot to work with.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Are we finished with our work session tonight, folks?
Just a matter by the board.
Well, let's make sure. Did I get agreement? We're done with our work session? Okay, so we actually do have another item under matters by the council, and then I'll come to you, Sammy, after that item.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Manager, next item, please.
It's just to look at the climate reality event fee waiver under other matters.
No presentation.
No
or anything.
presentation.
So basically, y'all, I think most of you have spoken with or heard from Randy about this, and I'll sort of turn this over to Randy if she needs to say more. But basically, the Climate Reality Group in Orange County has been working to organize this event. Is it the EV rodeo that we're talking about?
Yeah.
The EV rodeo event coming up. And I think there's been some participation by climate team members throughout this process as well. In any case, they're interested in having this event on the town commons, and they've asked for a waiver of the fee. There's some lack of clarity in our town's policy about how to do that. So it just seems safer, I think, in the manager's mind, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, Richard, but to come to the council and ask for permission. So I think the question is, are we okay with the fee waiver on this?
I move that we grant the fee waiver.
Okay.
I second.
And moved by Danny, seconded by Susan, that we waive the fee for this event. Do we need something about town sponsorship or something like that? Or?
No, just the fee waiver is the issue at this point. Right.
If we waive the fee, we can formally.
Just by waiving it, we are.
Just by waiving.
So, Catherine, I'll send you the.
Can we get
Hold on one
clarity on
second.
the policy
We want to
too?
have some discussion
Or
here.
along
So.
the line?
Eleazar?
Yeah, so I'm in line to, of course, supporting the event, but I want to make sure that I get clarity on the policy, right? You know, the question I sent you, Mr. Manager Brown, if this guide, right, was is in place since 2013, I remember. I might remember the date wrong, but there's no, if I understand it correctly, we're lacking the information about when it was adopted or if it was adopted. So I'm confused as far as moving forward. Do we need to adopt that guide if it hasn't been adopted? And are we then using guidelines in this conversation on things that hasn't been adopted? I'm very confused as to that.
No, it's a great question. And I actually think Richard wants clarity too. So that's where we are.
There is a community guide that we found dated 2013. We couldn't find a record if council adopted it, but in that guide, it does say that if an event is looking for a donation from council or a fee waiver, it should come before the board for review. I'm going to work with Charles and our special events committee to look at that guide, make sure it's clarified, and we'll bring it back to council for your consideration.
Yeah, please do, right? Because I'm definitely okay with approving this one. I'm just looking at, as we move forward, I don't want to find myself in a position where folks are coming to council for this waiver, and then also I don't want to be in a position where we don't have this formalized, or this formally adopted, or don't have evidence of that, and then what we did have in place before this was adopted
That's why we need a
was
policy.
different than this one, right?
Right.
That's where my confusion is, and I know that it's working on it. It's just want to name that as we move
Yeah,
forward.
that's important. Thanks, Eleazar. And we'll go to Barbara and then Randy.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, we talk a lot about process, so we can't skip around, and say okay for this and not okay for that. So that was my whole thing about just bringing clarity to the policy for understanding where are we really and who makes the decision. And that was it for me. I mean, I definitely support the event, but my question came around the clarity of the process.
Absolutely. Thanks, Barbara. And that's definitely why Richard wanted to bring it to us, because he had the same feeling of lack of clarity. Randy.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for first and foremost, and second to thank Richard, because it was assumed that the policy was written and that it was there. So it's interesting to me that there wasn't the specificity that we thought was there. The other thing that in talking with Richard about this over the last couple of weeks, is that we may find going forward that it's, there are different categories of events. So for example, and this is the example I gave Richard, that as we go forward, we will have more involvement in green neighborhoods. For example, let's say folks in neighborhoods want to sponsor something that's connected with showcasing what they're doing in their neighborhoods. Where does that fit in?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think this is why the policy will probably need some massaging
right.
before it's
but
ready.
This is why this is a good moment to do it. So thank you
That's
all.
right.
And
I just have
Barbara?
Yeah. So I see Mr. Harrington is still in here. So when I initially was thinking about this, I'm thinking special events. And then Randy sent the explanation, kind of explaining how it was actually framed up. And so that's how I got where I was. And I was a little confused because I was like, well, you know, Parks and Rec, special events, they probably have a criteria for a fee waiver. And why are we? I just thought at one point we had said we didn't want this kind of thing coming to us for a decisions, you know, it just seemed like a staff level decision to me. That's kind
That's why I
of,
think
you know, where I was.
the manager
with it.
definitely wants us to have something in place that he doesn't have to keep bringing back to us. And that's why we'll have the manager bring us a policy to approve and make it official. And hopefully that'll keep these questions from having to come up.
Cool.
All right, there's a motion by Danny, I believe, second by Susan to approve the requested waiver. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so no. Matter passes unanimously. Sammy has a matter and I have a quick matter.
Yeah, just quickly wanted to remind the mayor and the manager that 3 years ago, 2019, we had a motion to have this conversation about Bowling
Yeah.
Creek. So just want to make sure, you know, summer break has passed, that we have that.
Thank you. That is on my list as well, Sammy. Thank you very much. We have actually just recently, Richard and I talked about when to schedule that.
Thank you.
And I apologize for the delay. It has been a long time. Just very quickly, Richard, you and I talked about this morning, and it turns out it still has not been resolved, which to me seems like kind of a emergency at this point, really. But for more than 24 hours now, there has not been water at the Ashbrook Apartments. And it is still ongoing, apparently. And I don't know I know that you spoke to Owasso earlier today, but that's a pretty large community that apparently at least a big portion of, if not the entire community, does not have any water. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. See if somebody, whoever needs to take care of it, can deal with it.
Okay, but
All right.
they know the water's not on over there, right?
Well, I mean, that's a public health issue. They either need water or they need access to some other source of water. All right. With nothing further, I'd be open to a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Let's go.
Moved by Sammy, seconded by LSR. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you, everybody.